The joke lasted exactly 4 minutes. That's how long it took for Bravo Patrol, 12 combat-hardened Marines in full winter kit, to decide the woman standing at the tree line was somebody's mistake. No rank on her collar, no unit patch on her sleeve, a plain rifle case leaning against her leg like she'd brought a fishing rod to a gunfight. One of the sergeants laughed first, then 2 more. She never looked at them. She was watching the mountain. And the mountain, it turned out, was watching back. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. You won't want to miss what happens next. The briefing had lasted 22 minutes and accomplished almost nothing. That was Captain Ethan Ward's private assessment, formed somewhere around minute 14 when the battalion intelligence officer, a first lieutenant who looked like he'd gotten his commission 3 weeks ago, began explaining with complete confidence that Frosthaven Pass was cold but clear. Enemy activity in the Black Ridge Valley corridor, minimal. Last confirmed contact in the area, 6 days prior, a single displaced scout unit that had been driven south by the storm front. Ward had sat in that folding chair and nodded at the right moments and said nothing. He'd been doing this long enough to know that minimal and confirmed were the 2 most dangerous words in any pre-mission brief. The temperature outside was -16, the wind was already building. And somewhere up in those mountains, 6 days of silence meant either nothing was happening or something had been very patient. He'd kept that thought to himself. Outside the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, a repurposed cargo container with a propane heater that only worked on one side. Bravo Patrol was staging their gear in the half-dark of 0430. 12 men. Full winter load, white over gray camouflage shells, Gore-Tex liners, snowshoes clipped to external frames, cold-weather sleeping systems they'd hopefully never need. Each Marine moved with the particular economy of someone who'd packed and unpacked the same kit enough times to do it blind. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. Ward stepped out of the TOC and stood in the dark, letting his eyes adjust, doing the mental math he always did before a patrol. Who was sharp, who was tired, who was carrying something extra and trying not to show it. Corporal Davies was favoring his left knee again. Old injury, never fully healed, never fully reported. Sergeant Kowalski was running the weapons check with his usual precision, but he'd lost weight since Thanksgiving, and not in a healthy way. Lance Corporal Reyes was the only one who looked genuinely rested, which either meant he was 22 and indestructible, or he didn't understand what they were walking into, probably both. Then Ward saw her. She was standing at the far edge of the staging area, right where the gravel lot gave way to frozen ground and the first dark scrape of tree line. No unit, no visible rank. A plain tactical jacket, cold weather rated but unmarked, over what looked like standard-issue thermals. She had one pack, modest-sized, and a long rifle case propped against her right leg. The case itself was featureless, dark, hard shell, no manufacturer logo, no military markings. She was watching the mountains. Ward crossed the staging area and stopped beside her. Up close, he put her somewhere in her early 30s, maybe mid. Hard to tell. Her face was still, and not in the way of someone performing composure, in the way of someone who had simply stopped bothering with the energy. "Captain Ethan Ward," he said. "Bravo Element. You're attached to my patrol?" She turned and looked at him, brown eyes, level, assessing. The kind of look that didn't feel hostile, just thorough. "That's correct," she said. "And you are?" "An observer." Ward waited for more. She didn't offer it. "Attached from which unit?" "I'm not at liberty to specify." He studied her for a second. Not annoyed, genuinely puzzled. In his 12 years in the Marine Corps, he had dealt with ISR teams, MARSOC liaisons, Joint Task Force personnel, and the occasional intelligence asset that arrived with a cover story held together by paperclip and prayer. He could usually read the category within the first 30 seconds. This woman wasn't giving him enough to read. "Okay," he said, because he'd learned not to push attachments before a mission. "You stay inside the patrol formation. You move when we move, you stop when we stop. If we make contact, you find cover and you stay there. You do not engage unless I give the order." She looked at him steadily. "Understood." "Your call sign?" She paused. Just a beat, not dramatic, more like she was deciding something. Then, "Observer is fine for now." Ward held her gaze for another 2 seconds, then nodded and walked back to his element. Behind him, he heard Sergeant Kowalski's voice. Low, not intended for him, definitely intended to be heard. The hell is she? A bird watcher? A couple of suppressed laughs. Ward didn't turn around. They stepped off at 0520, into the dark and the cold. The patrol moved in a staggered column. Ward up front with his RTO, Corporal Thibodeau, and Pointman Lance Corporal Reyes breaking trail ahead of them. The woman, observer, fell in roughly third from the back, between Corporal Davies and Private First Class Ortega. Nobody spoke to her. She seemed unbothered by this. The terrain climbed immediately. Blackridge Valley was poorly named. It wasn't a valley so much as a series of compressed ridge lines and frozen creek beds that funneled between two larger mountain spines. In summer, Ward imagined it was probably miserable in a different way. Steep, dense, with vegetation, full of ankle-rolling loose stone. In January, it was a gray and white compression chamber. The snowpack was 3 feet deep on the flat, twice that in drifts. Every step required conscious effort. The cold was the real problem. -16 at the TOC meant significantly colder up here, with wind chill. Ward could feel it working through his insulation within the first hour. Not uncomfortable yet, but present. A persistent reminder that the environment was not neutral. The environment was actively hostile. They moved in near silence. The only sounds were the crunch of boots on packed snow, the occasional creak of equipment, the low background howl of wind channeling through the rock formations above them. Reyes stopped twice in the first 2 hours to indicate points of interest. Once for what turned out to be a rock formation that looked wrong from a distance. Once for a section of disturbed snow that they spent 8 minutes examining before concluding it was an animal trail, mountain goat or elk, moving south. Both times, Ward brought the patrol to a halt and gave the hand signals: freeze, hold, wait. Both times, the confirmation came back. Nothing. Both times, Ward noticed that the woman had already stopped before his signal reached the back of the formation. Not anticipating it, reading it, he filed that away. The sun came up around 0730, low and pale, doing almost nothing for warmth, but at least giving them visibility. Ward could see Frosthaven Pass now, set the actual target. A narrow cut through the ridgeline approximately 3 kilometers further northeast. The intelligence assessment called it a potential transit corridor for the enemy unit that had been spotted 6 days prior. The mission was simple: push to the pass, confirm status, photograph any evidence of recent activity, return. Simple on paper. At 08 Show, they stopped for a brief rest near a cluster of broken granite that offered some wind protection. Ward called the RTO over to check in with the TOC, got a clean comms check, then moved along the patrol line doing his check on each Marine. When he reached the woman, she was not resting. She was crouched at the edge of the granite cluster, facing northeast, looking at the valley floor ahead of them. She had her gloved hand held out, palm down, slightly angled, and she was watching the snow. "How are you doing on water?" Ward asked. She didn't look at him. "Fine." "Energy?" "Fine." He crouched beside her, followed her line of sight. "What are you looking at?" "The snow," she said. He looked at the snow. It was snow. Specifically? She was quiet for a moment, and he had the impression she was deciding whether the explanation was worth the time. "Wind's been coming from the northwest since we stepped off," she said finally. "Consistent. Look at the drift patterns along that ridgeline," she indicated with a slight movement of her chin. "Northeast face of that formation. The drift direction is inconsistent with the prevailing wind. Something in the pass is affecting airflow." Ward looked. He could see it. Barely. The snow along the northeast face of a rock formation, about 800 meters out, was piled at a slightly different angle than the surrounding terrain. "Terrain feature," he said. "Different rock shape changes the channeling." "Possibly." She paused. "The movement on the southeastern ridgeline, about 1,100 meters. Watch the shadows." He looked. The light was still low, the shadows long. For a long moment he saw nothing. Then a subtle change. Not movement exactly. A shift. Like something had adjusted position and the shadow had rearranged itself around it. Could be wind. Could be a branch. Could be snow falling from a shelf. "I'm seeing light and shadow doing what light and shadow do," he said. She didn't argue. "Okay." He held for another 3 seconds, watching. Nothing more. "Keep it in mind," she said quietly. That was all. He stood, moved back to the front of the formation, and called the patrol to order. 8:09:47. They were 2 kilometers into Frosthaven Pass when Sergeant Kowalski moved up alongside Ward and spoke low. "Captain, permission to speak freely." "Go ahead." The attachment. Kowalski had a face built for skepticism. Heavy brow, deep-set eyes, a jaw that seemed perpetually set. "Nobody's gotten a name, a unit, nothing. She's not on the patrol manifest. I checked before we stepped off." "I know." "So what is she?" "What she says. An observer." "From who?" "Not specified." Kowalski chewed on that. "She's carrying a precision rifle. That's not an observation kit." "No," Ward agreed. "And she spent 20 minutes this morning staring at snow." "She did." "So either she's very thorough or She flagged the shadow movement on the southeast ridgeline at grid. Ward checked his mental map. "Around 1,100 meters. I couldn't confirm it, but I didn't dismiss it either." Kowalski was quiet for a moment. "You believe her?" Ward thought about that. The honest answer was that he didn't know. He'd worked with enough people in high-stress environments to know that confidence didn't equal competence, and quiet didn't equal expertise. He'd also learned, the hard way, twice, to take seriously what he couldn't explain. "I believe she's paying attention," he said finally. "That's enough for now." Kowalski made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite dismissal, and dropped back. 40 meters back, the woman was walking in exactly the same way she'd been walking since they stepped off. Steady pace, minimal footprint adjustment on uneven terrain, eyes moving in a pattern that Ward, watching her from the front, had started to map. She wasn't scanning randomly. She was working a specific system, near, middle, far, near, middle, far, rotating on a rhythm that matched the terrain features. He'd seen that movement pattern exactly once before, on a deployment he almost never talked about, from a man who'd been running a program Ward wasn't officially cleared to know about. He pushed the thought away and focused on the trail. At 1:31, she did something that stopped everyone cold. The patrol had just cleared a narrow choke point between 2 rock faces, a natural funnel that made Ward's shoulders tighten every time they moved through it, and had emerged onto a wider shelf of snow-covered terrain. Ward called a halt to allow the rear of the column to clear the choke point before they continued. The woman stopped 4 steps ahead of the patrol's position, just stopped. Not in response to the halt signal. She'd stopped before it reached her. Then she turned around. "Captain." Her voice was quiet but carrying, not alarmed, controlled. "Halt the patrol." "We're already—" "Turn us around," she said, "back through the choke point." Ward looked at her. "That's a defensive liability. If we're moving through that gap and something is wrong." She looked at him steadily. "The wind coming out of the pass has changed. The temperature differential is off, and I haven't heard a bird call in 22 minutes. It's winter. I heard 2 calls when we entered the corridor. Mountain finches. They're still here. I can see them in that birch cluster." She indicated a stand of thin, leafless trees about 200 meters to their left. "They went silent 22 minutes ago." Ward looked at the birch cluster. He couldn't see any birds. He looked back at her. "Captain," she said, and there was something different in her tone. Not urgency exactly, but weight. Meaning. "I know this valley feels wrong." Behind him, he could hear Kowalski's breathing. Could feel the attention of the entire patrol on this moment. The intelligence assessment said clear. The lieutenant's briefing said minimal. The birds had gone quiet. Ward looked at her for 2 more seconds. Then he keyed his radio. "Bravo element, this is 6 actual. Hold position." He turned to Reyes at point. "Reyes, back us up 20 meters. Controlled movement. Don't rush it." "Captain," Kowalski's voice came in low. "If we pull back now without confirming a threat—" "Sergeant," Ward kept his voice even. 20 meters. Now." The patrol began to move. They made it 6 meters. The first round hit the snow 3 feet to Ward's left with a sound like a hammer's strike. A supersonic crack followed by the delayed report of a rifle somewhere up on the ridgeline. Then the valley erupted. The ambush came from 3 directions at once. High on the northeastern ridgeline, at least 2 firing positions. A second element on the southeast face, lower, closer, with automatic weapons. And a third, ground-level force moving out of the pass itself, using the gunfire as cover, pushing directly toward the patrol's position. The first burst of automatic fire tore through the space the patrol had been occupying 11 seconds earlier, exactly where the woman had told Ward to move them away from. Cover! Ward was already moving, driving left toward the rock shelf. Break left, break left! Ortega, get the saw up! Thibodeau, I need comms! The patrol fragmented in controlled directions. Some Marine Corps miracles were just muscle memory running faster than conscious thought. Davies went right and was already returning fire at the ridgeline. Kowalski grabbed Reyes by the collar and dragged them both behind a snow-covered boulder that would stop exactly nothing if the enemy had anything heavier than small arms. The woman had moved left. She was flat against the rock shelf, rifle case in hand, moving toward a position slightly ahead of Ward's. Not running, not crouching into stillness. Moving with the unhurried speed of someone who knew exactly where she was going. A round struck the rock 3 inches above Ward's head. He felt the fragments. He pressed himself against the stone and did a rapid count. 12 Marines, plus the attachment. He could account for 10 Marines visually, 2 he needed to locate. "Sound off!" he shouted. The responses came fast, layered over each other, punctuated by gunfire. "Davies, up! Kowalski, up! Reyes is up! Ortega, up! Thibodeau." A pause. "Thibodeau's hit. Right arm. He's ambulatory." 11. "Brennan," Ward called. Nothing. "Brennan." "Here, 6." The voice came from further right than it should have been, strained but coherent. "Got turned around coming through the choke point. I'm in the rocks at your 3 o'clock. I've got eyes on 2, maybe 3 shooters. Northeast face." 12. Ward exhaled. Everyone up, 1 casualty, functional. That was something, but the geometry was bad. They were in a depression with elevated fire on 2 sides and a ground element pushing from the north. The choke point behind them was a kill zone. Anyone moving back through it would be silhouetted, channeled, exposed. Moving forward meant pushing into the guns. Staying meant attrition. He looked left. The woman had her rifle case open. The weapon she assembled in the next 40 seconds was not standard issue anything. Ward had enough operational experience to recognize a precision rifle platform when he saw one, and what she was building from the hard shell case was in a category apart from the standard DMR systems he'd worked alongside. The chassis was long, very long, with a suppressor that added another significant length, a bipod that she deployed with practiced efficiency, and an optic system that looked like it cost more than a vehicle. She settled behind it with a movement that was completely unhurried. Cheek to stock, left hand forward on the bipod. Her right hand found the grip without looking. Ward pulled himself alongside her. "I need your assessment." 3 positions on the northeast ridge, she said, not lifting her eye from the scope. "The primary shooter is at approximately 900 meters, elevated. He's your biggest problem. He's got an angle on the rock shelf that's going to start costing you people in the next 4 minutes when they start adjusting fire. Secondary? 2 automatic weapons positions on the southeast face, closer, lower, suppression elements." She paused. "And a ground element, maybe 6 to 8 personnel moving through the pass. They'll reach this position in..." Another pause, measuring something Ward couldn't see. 9 minutes if they maintain current pace. "Can you engage the ridgeline sniper?" She said nothing for a second. Her hand moved slightly. Micro adjustments Ward could barely detect. "Wind is running 11 knots from my right, gusting. Temperature is negative 18.5 at this elevation. Call it negative 22 up where he is." Another pause. 940 meters. The angle is tight. "Can you?" She pulled back from the scope briefly and looked at him. There was something in her expression that Ward had not seen there before. Not excitement, not bravado. Something more like acknowledgement, like a door being opened that had been closed a long time. "Tell me your Marines can give me 4 minutes of sustained distraction," she said. Ward looked at her for 1 second, then he keyed his radio. "Bravo element, 6 actual. I need all available fire. Northeast ridgeline, maximum suppression. We are buying time. 4 minutes. Execute." The response was ragged and immediate. 7 rifles opened up on the ridgeline in a coordinated wall of fire that wasn't going to hit anything at this range, but would create exactly the kind of noise and muzzle flash to demand attention. Ward pressed himself against the rock beside the woman and watched. She was still. The patrol fired. The valley roared. She was still. Her breathing slowed. Ward could see it in the almost imperceptible movement of her shoulders. 1 breath. 2. A long exhale. And then Captain Ethan Ward heard something he would remember for the rest of his career. Not the shot itself, like the suppressor reduced it to a compressed businesslike sound, barely audible over the sustained fire of his patrol. It was the silence that came from the northeast ridgeline. One of the firing positions up there simply stopped. In a gunfight, silence from an enemy position means one of 4 things. They're relocating, reloading, preparing something worse, or they're done. The second shot came 7 seconds later. Another position went quiet. Kowalski's voice came over the radio. 6 actual, northeast ridge, second position, no longer active. What the? Ward didn't answer. I was watching her cycle the bolt with the same untroubled efficiency she'd used since she opened the case. Find the next target. Settle. Breathe. The valley continued to roar, and somewhere in the background, Ward registered a memory. A name, half heard in a conversation he wasn't supposed to have been part of, attached to a file he'd never seen, Sticky 6. He looked at the woman behind the rifle. "That's you, isn't it?" he said. Not a question. She didn't look up from the scope. "Focus on your radio, Captain." The third position on the northeast ridge went silent, and the ground element from the pass, Ward checked his watch, was still 6 minutes out. The saw opened up from Ortega's position, a sustained hammering burst that chewed through the snow and rock along the southeast face and brought exactly the kind of chaos Ward needed. Davies was working his rifle in controlled pairs, calling targets over the radio with the flat professionalism of someone who'd stopped being scared and started being busy. Brennan had repositioned from his isolated rock cluster and was now in a defilade position that gave him partial coverage on the northern approach. It wasn't enough. Ward knew it wasn't enough. The southeast automatic weapons positions were lower, closer, and better protected than the ridgeline shooters. They had angles on the patrol's current cover that were going to become catastrophic when the ground element arrived and forced the Marines to split their attention. The geometry of the kill zone was still wrong. Better than 11 minutes ago, but wrong in the ways that mattered most. Thibodeau was behind a rock with a field dressing on his right forearm, working the radio one-handed with the focused intensity of someone refusing to acknowledge pain. Ward could hear him. TOC contact, grid coordinates, contact report, request for QRF. The response came back fragmented through the terrain. Possible relay delay, QRF acknowledgement, ETA not confirmed, which in practical terms meant you're on your own for a while, figure it out. Ward moved in a low crawl back to her position. She had shifted, moved 3 meters left along the rock shelf to a new angle, the rifle repositioned on the bipod, her body flat against the snow in a way that looked uncomfortable and probably wasn't registering to her as anything at all. "Southeast face," Ward said. 2 automatic weapons positions. They're going to pin us when the ground element arrives. "I know. Can you reach them from here?" "The left position, yes. The right position." She paused, and he could see her working through it. "The right position has rock cover I can't get around from this angle. I'd need to move." "Move where?" She lifted her chin slightly, a minimal gesture toward a rock formation about 40 meters to their left and forward. It was exposed ground. Not impossibly exposed, but the kind of crossing that required either speed, distraction, or luck. And luck was already running a deficit. "I can cover you," Ward said. "No." She said it without hesitation, without apology. "I need the saw to move left and open up on the southeast face for 60 seconds. That gives me the crossing." Ward studied the ground between their current position and the rock formation, 40 meters, maybe 45. The snow was deep enough to slow movement significantly. 2, maybe 3 seconds of full exposure at the midpoint. He keyed his radio. Ortega, reposition the saw 20 meters left along the shelf and prepare to engage southeast face on my mark. Do not move until I say." "Copy 6. He looked at her. "When you're set, I need you to tell me what you need from us for the ground element." She was already checking her pack, pulling a secondary magazine, loading it, setting it within reach. 6 to 8 personnel in the pass. They'll be in the open when they clear the last rock formation before this shelf. Approximately 50 meters of open ground. If your Marines can hold them at the mouth of that formation," she paused, "they won't expect fire from 2 directions." "They're about to get it from 3, Ward said. She looked at him then, brief, assessing, something that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same general territory. "Mark," Ward said into the radio. Ortega's saw erupted. The southeast face of the valley lit up with impacts, tracers visible in the flat gray light, the sound enormous and immediate. Ward watched the woman go. She moved like water finding the lowest point. Not running, too much snow for running, but flowing, staying low, using the contours of the terrain in a way that suggested she'd looked at the ground and mapped every available depression before she moved. She hit the midpoint exposure in a controlled slide, barely raising her profile above the snowpack, and made the rock formation in 14 seconds. Ward exhaled. "Ortega, cease fire on my mark. 3, 2, mark." The saw went quiet. In the sudden relative silence, Ward could hear the southeast face still returning fire, but reduced, disrupted, one of the two positions tracking toward where the saw had been rather than where it was now. Then the woman's rifle spoke from the new position. The left southeast position went silent. "Contact north!" Brennan's voice, hard and clipped. "Ground element clearing the pass. I've got visual, moving fast. Kowalski, Reyes, Davies, north face, break left, get into that ridgeline rock, give me a crossfire position." Ward was already moving. "Brennan, hold what you have, keep their heads down." The ground element had apparently decided to stop being patient. They came fast. Faster than Ward had expected, moving in 2 files through the snow with the efficiency of people who'd done this before and believed the hard work was already done. 7 of them, Ward counted. Maybe 8. Heavily equipped, moving with purpose. They had not adjusted for what had changed on the ridgeline. They had not adjusted for the silence from the southeast face. And they had not adjusted for the fact that the patrol they'd expected to be broken and suppressed was spread across 3 rock positions with overlapping fields of fire. The first exchange was brutal and short. The ground element took immediate casualties at the mouth of the formation. Ward's crossfire worked exactly as he'd hoped, catching them in a space with no clean exit. 2 went down in the first seconds. The rest went to ground. From her position, the woman engaged the flankers. The 2 personnel who'd peeled right, trying to find an angle around the rocks. The shots came at irregular intervals, not rapid, not dramatic, each one purposeful, each one followed by a specific silence. Ward was moving and firing and managing his radio simultaneously, the way he'd been trained to do and the way the body learned to do after enough repetitions when he heard Kowalski's voice cut through. 6. Right position southeast face is still hot. I've got 2 Marines exposed on the remaining southeast automatic weapons position opened up at that moment, raking the rocks where Kowalski and Reyes had positioned. Ward heard a shout. Reyes wordless, the kind of sound that could mean several things, and all of them were bad. "Reyes! I'm up!" Reyes's voice was strained. "I'm up! It's my pack! I'm up!" The round had hit his external frame. Not him. Close. Ward looked toward the woman's position. She had already moved. Was moving, actually, repositioning again, angling for the southeast face through a different route, using the firefight as cover the way Ward used his Marines and his Marines used terrain. The last southeast position had 3 seconds of remaining life. Ward knew this the way he knew a lot of things in firefights. Not logically, not by calculation, but by a kind of operational intuition built from years of watching how these things ended. He knew it by the shift in the sound, by the pattern of her movement, by the way she'd already identified and was solving the problem before he'd finished registering it as a problem. The shot came from an angle he hadn't expected. She'd found a position in the rocks that gave her a line the southeast shooter hadn't covered. Silence. The valley went quiet so suddenly that Ward's ears rang with it. He held, breathed, listened. Wind, the creak of snow settling. Somewhere, the thin, distant call of a mountain finch reclaiming its airspace. "Report," he said into the radio. "All elements, report." They came back one by one. All 12. Thibodeau's arm. Confirmed not life-threatening. Confirmed still functional. Reyes's pack. Destroyed. Reyes intact. One other minor wound. Davies. Something that had opened up his left hand and was producing an impressive amount of blood relative to its actual severity. Ward stood up slowly, rifle still in his hands, and looked at the valley. The northeast ridgeline, quiet. 3 positions, all silent. The southeast face, quiet. The pass approach. 4 enemy personnel confirmed down, 3 more position unknown. Either fled or still in cover waiting for a situation that was no longer developing in their favor. Ward keyed his radio. TOC, this is Bravo 6 actual. Contact broken. Area of operations is standby for assessment. He stopped. Because she was walking back across the open ground toward his position, rifle slung, moving through the snow at the same steady pace she'd maintained since 0520 that morning. Her face was unchanged. Her breathing, when she reached him, was elevated but controlled, the kind of exertion that had been processed and filed away. She stopped in front of him. Ward looked at her for a long moment. Sticky 6, he said. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. You need to do a casualty count, she said, and you need to contact TOC about the ground element. At least 3 of them went south into the pass and they haven't been accounted for. Ward continued to look at her. Behind him, he could hear his Marines beginning to move. The sounds of a patrol reorganizing after contact, the voices clipped and purposeful, the training taking over. Davies calling for someone to help with his hand. Kowalski doing a weapons check with a thoroughness that was probably covering for the fact that his hands needed something to do. Reyes, with his destroyed pack, making a dark joke about the gear replacement process that produced 3 strained laughs from the nearest Marines. How long? Ward asked. She looked at him. How long have you been doing this? A pause. Not a long one. Long enough that I stopped counting. That name, Sticky 6, I've heard it once. In a conversation I was never supposed to hear, the person who said it, Ward stopped, reorganized. He said it the way you say something that doesn't have an explanation attached. She adjusted the strap of her rifle. Your TOC contact. I'll make the contact, he said, but you and I are going to have a conversation before we move out. She looked at him with that same level assessing expression. Whatever she was weighing, she kept the result to herself. Make your contact first, she said. The 3 that went south won't stay in the pass. Ward held her gaze one more second. Then he raised the radio. Around him, his Marines were checking on each other. The quiet physical accounting that happened after every firefight, the hands on shoulders, the eyes checking eyes, the unspoken confirmation that the person beside you was still a person and not an absence. Kowalski had moved to Thibodeau and was sitting beside him, not helping exactly, just present, which was its own kind of help. Nobody was laughing about the birdwatcher now. Ward watched his Marines and made his contact with TOC and kept one part of his attention on the woman standing at the edge of the rock shelf, looking northeast, watching the pass. The birds were calling again in the birch trees. She had already moved on from the last 4 hours and was reading the next 4 hours in the patterns of snow and shadow and wind. Ward's TOC contact came back with confirmation. QRF was 40 minutes out. Stay put. Consolidate. Mark your position. 40 minutes. He looked at the pass. Then he looked at her. She turned from the northeast before he spoke, as if she'd heard the thought rather than waited for the words. She walked directly to him and stopped at a distance that was close enough to be private and far enough to be professional. The 3 that withdrew, she said quietly. They didn't go south because they were retreating. Ward felt the cold in a different way suddenly. They went south because there's something in the past they needed to get back to. She looked at him steadily. The ambush wasn't the objective. It was the distraction. The radio in Ward's hand felt very heavy. From what? She looked at the pass, then back at him. And for the first time since he'd met her at the tree line in the dark that morning, he saw something shift behind her eyes. Not fear, nothing as simple as that, but the particular gravity of someone who has put a picture together and does not like what they are seeing. That's what we need to find out, she said, before they finish whatever they came here to do. Ward looked at his 12 Marines, 1 injured, 1 shaken, all of them running on adrenaline and cold, and the specific clarity that comes after surviving something that should have gone differently. 40 minutes for QRF, a pass with 3 armed personnel and an unknown objective, and a woman whose call sign he'd heard once in a conversation that had ended with a 3-second silence, the way you go silent when you say a name that carries more weight than the words around it. He keyed the radio again. TOC, Bravo 6 actual, updating contact report. Possible secondary objective in Frosthaven Pass. I am advancing to investigate with current element, QRF, to follow our beacon. Acknowledge. A pause. Static. Then, Bravo 6, TOC. Copy your transmission. Advise against advance until QRF arrival. Over. Ward looked at the pass. Noted, he said. Bravo 6 out. He lowered the radio and looked at his sergeant. Kowalski was already on his feet. You heard? Ward asked. Heard enough, Kowalski said. His voice was flat and certain, the kind of certainty that had nothing to do with enthusiasm and everything to do with the particular stubbornness that kept Marines moving when the sensible option was to stop. Ward turned to the patrol. Thibodeau, you stay with the position. Maintain comms, guide QRF in. Davies, you're with Thibodeau. He looked at the remaining 9. Everyone else, weapons check, 60 seconds. We're moving into the pass. Nobody argued. Nobody asked why. They looked at the woman. She had already shouldered her rifle and was studying the approach to the pass with the same unhurried attention she'd given the snow that morning, and the shadows, and the birds that had gone quiet 22 minutes before the world came apart. Reyes, without his pack, rifle in hand, 22 and apparently indestructible, moved up beside her. Hey, he said. She glanced at him. For what it's worth, he said, I believe you. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the pass. Start believing faster next time, she said. Reyes blinked. Then he laughed. Short, surprised, genuine. The kind of laugh that came out because it had nowhere else to go. Ward heard it and said nothing. I was already looking at Frosthaven Pass, already calculating angles and distances and the weight of whatever was waiting inside it. The birds were still calling. The wind was picking up. And somewhere in the dark throat of that frozen corridor, 3 armed men were moving toward something they hadn't told their ambush team about. Ward gave the signal to advance. The patrol moved into the pass. Frosthaven Pass swallowed them whole. That was the only way Ward could think of it. The way the walls closed in on both sides as the patrol pushed northeast, the ridgelines rising until they blocked the pale winter sky to narrow strips of gray, the wind channeling and compressing and becoming something meaner and more personal than it had been in the open valley. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in the first 100 meters, maybe 5. Ward's face registered it before his brain did. The particular bite that meant exposed skin was now a liability, not just a discomfort. He kept the patrol tight. 7 Marines plus the woman, moving in a staggered file with Reyes on point and Kowalski at drag, the spacing reduced to 10 meters because visibility in the pass was already degrading. The snow underfoot had changed texture, harder, compacted by wind funneling through the corridor, the kind of surface that recorded footprints with uncomfortable clarity. Ward noted the tracks as they moved. Fresh ones, moving northeast. 3 sets. Irregular spacing, one person clearly moving faster than the other 2. Not fleeing, purposeful. The woman was reading the same tracks. Ward knew because of where her eyes went, down and forward, then ahead, then to the walls, then back down. The same system, adjusted for the terrain. Near, middle, far. He moved up alongside her briefly. What's your read? He said low. She didn't look at him. 2 of them are carrying weight they weren't carrying during the ambush. You can see it in the depth of the right footprint on the lead track, heavier on one side. Ward looked at the tracks. He could see the depth variation once she named it, and not before. Equipment. Or a casualty, she said. But the pace is wrong for that. Too fast. They're not dragging anyone. So they picked something up. Or they're bringing something out. Ward processed this. What kind of operation runs an ambush as a distraction? One where the ambush is expendable, she said. And she moved back to her position in the file without elaborating. Ward thought about that for the next 200 meters and didn't arrive anywhere comfortable. So, at 1204, Reyes stopped. The hand signal came back down the file, freeze, hold, and Ward moved up in a controlled crouch, keeping his profile below the rock line on his left. Reyes was flat against the eastern wall of the pass, pointing forward with 2 fingers. Ward came up beside him and looked. The pass opened slightly ahead, not wide, but enough. A natural alcove had formed where a section of the eastern wall had partially collapsed at some point in the geological past, leaving a shallow cave-like depression about 6 meters deep and perhaps 10 meters wide. The ceiling was rock and frozen overhang. The floor was compacted snow, partially sheltered from the wind. There were 3 of them. Two men were crouched over a case, large, metal, the kind of case that was built to protect something specific from impact and temperature. The third was standing with his back to the alcove entrance, scanning the pass in the direction the patrol had come from. He was good. His eyes were moving in a proper pattern, not just looking at the obvious spaces. He hadn't seen them yet because Reyes had stopped at the last moment before the sightline cleared, which meant Reyes was either very good or very lucky, and Ward had long since stopped trying to distinguish between the two in the field. Ward pulled back, reached back and signaled, "Pull back 10 meters, form up," no sound. The patrol withdrew in absolute silence, the kind of silence that Marines produce when they understand that noise is the difference between a controlled situation and a catastrophic one. They formed up behind a rock bend that gave Ward a degree of acoustic cover, and he crouched them in tight. 3 personnel, he said, barely above a whisper. Alcove, 11 o'clock from point. 1 sentry, 2 working a case. I need eyes on that case before I decide how we handle this. I can get eyes on it, the woman said. Ward looked at her. There's a collapsed section of the western wall 20 meters back, she said. The debris field gives a line of sight into the alcove from a higher angle. Partial cover. You were looking at that on the way in, Ward said. Yes. How long have you been mapping exit and observation points? Since we entered the pass. Kowalski made a sound. Ward didn't look at him. What's in the case? Ward asked. I don't know yet. That's why I need the higher angle. If it's what I think it might be. Ward stopped himself. He wasn't going to say it out loud in front of 9 Marines until he had confirmation, because there was a specific kind of controlled panic that came with certain categories of information, and he needed these Marines functional for at least the next 20 minutes. Go. 2 minutes. If you're not back in 2 minutes, we move without you. She was already moving. Ward watched her go, back along the route they'd come, staying against the western wall, moving with that same unhurried efficiency that he'd noticed hours ago, and now understood in a completely different context. She reached the debris field, found a foothold in the collapsed rock, and went up. 12 feet, maybe 15. She settled into a position that Ward could barely see, flat against the broken rock face, and went still. 90 seconds. Kowalski moved to Ward's shoulder. Captain. The word carried a full sentence of meaning. I know, Ward said. Whatever's in that case, I know, Sergeant. We've got 1 partially functional radio, 9 people, and QRF 40 minutes out. 32 now. 32. And 3 armed personnel with unknown equipment and unknown intentions, and she wants us to... She's observing, Ward said. We're holding. That's what's happening right now. Kowalski went quiet. Around them, 8 Marines held their positions with weapons up, watching their angles, doing what they'd been trained to do, which was exactly what Ward needed them to do while he managed the part of the situation that training hadn't fully covered. The woman came down from the debris field at 1 minute 48 seconds. She moved directly to Ward, and she crouched close, and she spoke very quietly. It's a communications relay, she said. Ward stared at her. Military-grade compact, the kind that's designed to uplink through terrain interference. They're setting it up. She paused. It's not a weapon. It's a transmitter. For what? The kind of transmission you make when you're coordinating with a second element that isn't here yet. She looked at him steadily. The ambush bought them time. They used that time to move this relay into position. Ward's mind was already running the calculation. A relay in Frosthaven Pass at this elevation, with a clear line northeast, it would have range. Significant range. The pass was essentially a natural antenna dish, the ridgelines focusing and amplifying anything pointed through its corridor. Who are they coordinating with? I don't know. Estimate. She was quiet for a moment, and Ward recognized that the pause was not uncertainty, but precision. She was separating what she knew from what she was inferring, and she was going to tell him the difference. The relay they're setting up has a specific bandwidth signature. I've seen that equipment configuration once before, in a context I can't discuss here. Another pause. It's not standard military issue for any regional force I know of. Someone supplied it specifically. Outside support. That would be my reading? Yes. Ward looked at Kowalski. Kowalski looked back at him with the expression of a man who has just understood that the problem is significantly larger than it appeared and is deciding whether to be angry about it now or later. Later, Ward said, which wasn't a response to anything Kowalski had said aloud, but Kowalski nodded anyway. "We need to stop that relay from going active," the woman said. "Once it's transmitting, whoever they're coordinating with will know the ambush failed. They'll have time to adjust." "Adjust to what?" "Whatever the actual objective is." She looked at him, and the look was patient and serious and completely without the kind of drama that the moment probably warranted. "The ambush was expensive. They sent 12 people to die as a distraction. Whatever they're protecting with that relay is worth more than 12 people to someone." Ward held very still for 3 seconds. In his experience, there were moments in the field where the math became very clear and very bad simultaneously, and the only thing that distinguished a good officer from a paralyzed one was the ability to keep moving through the clarity without letting the bad part of it stop you. He'd been in 2 of those moments before today. "Options," he said. "We take them now," she said, "before the relay goes active. We have surprise in numbers, and their sentry is good but not exceptional. Or we wait for QRF and risk the relay going live. Or," Ward said, "we let the relay go live and track the transmission." She considered this. "We don't have the equipment to track it." "No, but we have a radio and a TOC that does." She was quiet. In that quiet, Ward could hear the wind through the pass and the distant, muffled sounds of the 3 personnel in the alcove working on their equipment, and somewhere under all of it, very faint, the sound of something being connected, powered up, coming online. "They're moving fast," she said. "How long?" 5 minutes, maybe 4. Ward made his decision. "Kowalski. Left element, you, Reyes, and Martinez. You're going to the eastern wall, 20 meters forward. You get a position on the alcove entrance. Do not engage until I give the word. Copy. Chen, Vasquez, right element. Western wall, parallel position. You're watching for anyone approaching from further northeast. If something comes through that pass, I need 30 seconds warning. Copy. Harper, you're with me. We're going center, directly up the approach." Ward turned to the woman. "You're with my element." She looked at him. "Problem?" he said. "If they're fast and the relay goes active before we reach them, the transmission will go through whether we stop them or not. Then we move fast. I need a position where I can deal with the sentry before he raises an alarm. You'll have it. I need it before your element reaches the approach sight line. If he sees your element first, how far out do you need?" She calculated. 50 meters from the alcove entrance. Western wall. I need 45 seconds. Ward looked at the distance, looked at the terrain, ran it. "You get 35, he said. She nodded once, and that was enough. They moved at 22:19. Ward gave Kowalski's left element 30 seconds head start, watched them flow along the eastern wall with the particular compressed efficiency of Marines, who understood that speed and silence were not contradictions, they were requirements. Then he signaled Chen and Vasquez right. They went without a word. Then he looked at Harper, young, solid, reliable in the way that some people simply were without having to work at it, and at the woman, and he said, "Now." The western wall approach was harder than the eastern. The debris field from the collapsed section created obstacles that required routing around rather than through, adding time Ward didn't have. He moved quickly and quietly and trusted Harper to match him. The woman moved ahead of both of them, threading the debris with a route that seemed counterintuitive until Ward followed it and realized it was faster and quieter than the obvious path. At 40 meters from the alcove entrance, she stopped. Put her hand back. The flat palm of hold. Ward stopped. Harper stopped. She was looking at a position along the western wall, a natural shelf of rock, elevated, that gave a sight line into the alcove approach. She looked at Ward. He nodded. She went up. Ward counted. At his left, Kowalski's element was in position. He could see the edge of Kowalski's boot heel behind a rock, which meant the rest of the element was properly concealed. Good. The woman settled into her position. Ward couldn't see her from his angle. She'd merged with the rock surface the way you merge with things when you've been doing this long enough that concealment becomes instinct rather than effort. He counted to 30, reached 35. The sentry in the alcove turned to check the pass, and stopped turning, not because of a shot, not because of a sound. He stopped turning because the woman, from her position on the western wall shelf, had done something. Ward didn't see it, couldn't see it, but the sentry's body language changed in a specific way. His posture shifted from active scan to something more careful, more listening, the way people go when they've detected something at the edge of their perception and haven't categorized it yet. It lasted 2 seconds. Then Ward was moving, Harper alongside him, and Kowalski's element was flowing from the eastern wall, and the sentry turned back to the alcove and said something sharp in a language Ward didn't recognize, and one of the 2 men at the case started to stand. The next 15 seconds were controlled violence. Ward hit the alcove entrance at the same moment Kowalski's element came from the other side, and the geometry was exactly what it needed to be. The sentry found himself looking at converging threats from angles that didn't give him a clean option, and the 2 men at the case found Harper's rifle in their direct sightline before either of them had fully processed what was happening. "Down! Down! Hands where I can see them!" The sentry made a decision. Ward had watched enough people make that decision to recognize it in the body before it became action. The specific tightening, the weight shift, the calculation that said the odds were wrong but the attempt was required. Kowalski hit him first, not with a weapon, shoulder, full body weight, driving the sentry into the alcove wall with enough force to take the decision off the table. They went down together in the snow and came back up with Kowalski's knee on the sentry's back and the sentry's hands being extracted from wherever they'd been going. The 2 men at the case went to the ground without further argument. Harper had them at close range, and Harper, Ward had observed over 3 months, had a particular quality of stillness when he had a weapon up that communicated very effectively that he was not performing threat, he was containing it. The 2 men read this correctly and stayed flat. Ward crossed to the case in 4 steps. The relay was powered. A small status display on the unit's face showed a sequence of readout lines. Ward couldn't read the language, but the signal bar in the upper right corner was climbing. 3 bars. 4. "It's active?" he said. The woman was at his shoulder. She'd come down from the wall shelf and was in the alcove, looking at the unit. "Not yet," she said. "It's acquiring. 4 more bars before it transmits." Ward looked at the unit, looked at the display. 5 bars now. "Can you stop it?" She crouched in front of the unit. Her hands went to the casing, not the controls, the casing itself. And she was feeling for something, running her fingers along the seam with a focused attention that looked completely out of place given that a bar graph was climbing in the upper right corner. 6 bars. "Hey," Ward said. "I know," she said. 7 bars. Her fingers found something on the left side of the casing, a panel, recessed, not obvious. She pressed it, and it didn't give. Pressed again, differently, and it popped open. Inside, a secondary power bus, 3 connections, a status indicator light that was currently green. 8 bars. She pulled 2 of the 3 connections simultaneously. The display went dark. The alcove went quiet, except for the wind and the sound of Kowalski's weight on the sentry's back and the sentry's controlled breathing, which was the breathing of someone who has decided to wait for better information before making another decision. Ward looked at the dark display. Then he looked at her. She was studying the interior of the panel with an expression that was completely unreadable. Not relief, not satisfaction, just the focused attention of someone processing what they're looking at. "How did you know about the secondary bus?" Ward said. She didn't answer immediately, closed the panel, stood. "How did you know?" he repeated. She looked at him, and the look was the same level, assessing look she'd given him at the tree line that morning, at the rock shelf during the firefight, in every moment where Ward had asked a question that she'd decided whether to answer. "I've seen this equipment before," she said. "I told you that. In a context you can't discuss." "Yes." "That answer is getting old." "I know," she said. And for the first time, something shifted slightly in her expression. Not apology, not discomfort, but the particular weight of someone carrying a classification that doesn't get lighter with time. "It's still the only answer I have for you right now." Ward held her gaze. "The people who supplied this equipment," he said, "the second element they were coordinating with, it's still out there." "Yes." "And now they know the relay didn't transmit, which means they know something went wrong." "Yes." "Which means they're going to want to find out what went wrong." She was quiet for a moment, then, "They're going to send someone to look." Ward turned to Kowalski. "Secure these 3. Full search. Everything on their person. Document and bag it. I want that relay packed and ready to move in 5 minutes. Kowalski acknowledged and began issuing instructions. The Marines moved with purpose, professional, efficient, the chaos of the past 2 hours compressed into operational routine. Ward stepped to the alcove entrance and looked northeast along the pass. It continued for another kilometer, maybe more, before the ridge lines opened up again. Whatever was beyond it, he couldn't see. The sky above was flatter than it had been, clouds building, the light going gray and diffuse in the way that preceded weather in the mountains. The woman stepped up beside him. QRF is what, 20 minutes now? She said. 18, if they made good time. Ward looked at the sky. Weather's coming. Yes. If the second element is moving, they're moving before the weather closes in. That would be my read. Ward was quiet for a moment. He was doing the math he didn't want to do. The math that put his 9 functional Marines and 1 unidentified woman with a classified past in a narrow corridor against an unknown second element of unknown size, with a weather system closing in, 18 minutes from backup, and 3 prisoners who were currently providing 0 intelligence. He turned and looked at the prisoners. 2 of the men at the case were saying nothing, heads down, hands behind them, the practiced compliance of trained personnel who'd been told what to do if captured. The sentry was different. Kowalski had him against the alcove wall now, and the sentry was watching Ward with an expression that was evaluating rather than hostile, the look of someone taking stock. Ward crossed to him. He crouched to eye level. The sentry was approximately Ward's age, maybe younger, hard to tell under the cold weather gear. His eyes were dark and very still. I'm going to ask you one question, Ward said. You don't have to answer it, but I want you to think about the fact that the people who sent you here used you as cover for a relay operation. They sent 12 people to die as a distraction, and they sent 3 of you to do the actual work. I want you to think about what that means for how much your life is worth to whoever's running this. The sentry said nothing. How many in the second element? Ward said. Nothing. Ward held for 5 seconds, then stood, turned back to the alcove entrance. Captain? The woman's voice, quiet. He turned. She was looking at the sentry. Ask him about the timing. Ward looked at her. She kept her eyes on the sentry. He turned back, crouched again. When was the second element supposed to receive the relay signal? He said. The sentry's eyes moved, just slightly, just enough. Not to the woman. Away from her. The kind of movement that happens when something lands and the body tries to hide the landing. Ward waited. The sentry said nothing, but the movement had happened, and they'd both seen it, and that was its own kind of answer. Ward stood, looked at the woman. He already knows they're late, she said, barely above a breath. He's been counting. Ward looked at the sentry one more time. The sentry looked back with those still, evaluating eyes, and Ward saw it now. What he'd read as compliance was something else. The man wasn't waiting to be processed. He was waiting for a clock to run out. Kowalski. Ward's voice was very controlled. Get everyone moving. We're pulling back to the main valley. Now. Leave the relay. We don't have time. Captain. Now, Sergeant. Kowalski read the tone and started moving. The Marines came off their positions without question, falling into withdrawal formation, 2 of them managing the 3 prisoners with practiced efficiency. Reyes taking point again in the direction they'd come. The woman was already at the alcove entrance, looking northeast. Ward came up beside her. What's the timing? I don't know exactly. She was still looking northeast. But he knows, and whatever it is... She stopped, listened. Ward listened too. Wind, snow settling, the creak of rock contracting in the cold, and then, from somewhere northeast, further than sight but not further than sound, the specific, unmistakable percussion of a rotary engine, still distant, still moving, but oriented toward them. Ward felt the cold differently again. They're not sending someone to look, the woman said. They're already coming. She turned from the northeast and looked at Ward, and what he saw in her face was not panic, not even urgency in the performative sense. It was the focused, stripped-down attention of someone who has run the calculation and arrived at an answer they don't like but intend to work with anyway. How fast can your Marines move? She said. Ward was already looking at the pass behind them, the route back, the terrain, the distance between their current position and the open valley where QRF was coming. 18 minutes ago, he'd said 18 minutes for QRF. Whatever was coming from the northeast was going to arrive in less than that. He turned to his patrol. "Double time," he said. "Let's go." They moved fast and they moved hard, and it still wasn't going to be enough. Ward knew it inside the first 200 meters. The math was simple and ugly. The rotary sound from the northeast was getting louder at a rate that meant fixed wing would have been better news. Rotary meant it could follow terrain. Rotary meant it could put people down exactly where it wanted them. And the pass, the same narrow corridor that had made the relay position so effective, was now working against withdrawal. 1 kilometer of channeled terrain, walls too steep to climb quickly, exit behind them still 400 meters out. The prisoners were slowing them down. Not dramatically, not in the way of active resistance. These three understood their situation and were moving with the compliance of people who'd decided that cooperation was the smarter posture for now. But 3 additional bodies at gunpoint, in deep snow, through a confined corridor, cost time in increments. A stumble, a redirect, a moment where the geometry of escort didn't line up with the geometry of terrain and someone had to adjust. Ward made the decision at the 250-meter mark. Kowalski. He didn't slow down. Prisoners to Reyes and Martinez, full custody. They do not stop moving regardless of what happens. And us? Kowalski said. We establish rear security. Ward glanced at the woman. How long before that aircraft is overhead? She was listening, head slightly tilted. 3 minutes, maybe 3.5. Speed? It's slowing. It's looking for something. Ward thought about what it was looking for. The relay that didn't transmit. The team that wasn't responding. The timeline that had gone wrong somewhere in Frosthaven Pass, while 12 people died in the valley below as the price of buying time for it. It's going to find us, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. Same flat certainty. The path curved left ahead, the pass bending around a rock formation before the final straightaway to the valley exit. Ward stopped at the curve, turned, and looked back northeast. Nothing visible yet. The sound was clearer now, a rhythmic percussion that vibrated in the chest more than the ears. He turned to Kowalski. Get everyone through that curve and into the valley. You see QRF, you get the prisoners to them first, and you tell them what we've got. Captain, Kowalski. The sergeant held for a second, jaw set, doing the math Ward had already done. Then he turned and started moving the patrol. Reyes and Martinez flanked the prisoners. Harper fell in behind. Chen and Vasquez took wide positions, watching the walls. Ward watched them go. The woman had not moved. He looked at her. You should go with them, he said. That aircraft finds this pass empty, she said. It follows the patrol into the valley. Your QRF is going to arrive into a contested landing zone. I know. So we need to give it something to think about here. Ward looked at her. She was already moving, not back toward the alcove, but toward the western wall, toward the debris field where she'd climbed earlier. Her rifle was unslung and in her hands. That's a rotary aircraft, he said, following, not a fixed position on a ridgeline. I know what it is. Range, speed, likely armed. Captain. She stopped and looked at him with an expression that was almost impatient, or as close to impatient as her face ever got, which was a very controlled version of the thing. I'm not going to shoot it down. I'm going to make sure it knows exactly where we are so it doesn't look anywhere else. Ward stared at her. You're going to use yourself as bait. Us, she said, unless you'd prefer to go with your sergeant. He looked at her for 2 full seconds. What do you need from me? He said. Keep your radio active. When QRF is 90 seconds out, I need to know. And until then? Slow. Stay behind me, and don't do anything until I tell you. Ward unslung his rifle and followed her to the debris field. The western wall debris field was worse going up the second time. The snow on the broken rock had compacted from the earlier climb, making the handholds less reliable, the footing less certain. Ward climbed with his rifle slung across his back and his hands doing work. His hands weren't entirely suited for in heavy gloves. He made it to the shelf position in 40 seconds, which was 10 seconds longer than he wanted. The woman was already there. She'd set up in the same position she'd used for observation, prone, bipod deployed, rifle-oriented northeast along the pass. Her pack was positioned to her right, open, with a secondary magazine and what appeared to be a small rangefinder sitting on top. The sound of the rotary was much clearer up here. The pass was acting as an amplifier as much as a corridor. Ward settled in behind her and to the left, where he had a view northeast without being forward of her position. He pulled out his radio, confirmed it was active, checked the channel. TOC, Bravo 6 Actual. SITREP update. Patrol is withdrawing to Main Valley with 3 EPW. Observer and 6 Actual are holding in pass. Advise QRF sharp. We have a rotary aircraft inbound from northeast. Unknown affiliation, unknown armament. We need QRF to expedite and advise when 90 seconds out. Acknowledge. The response came back with the kind of controlled static that meant the terrain was fighting the signal. He caught most of it. QRF en route, ETA revised to 9 minutes. Stand by for aircraft advisory. 9 minutes. He relayed this to the woman. She said nothing. She was looking through her scope, and the scope was pointed down the pass, and Ward followed her line and saw, at the edge of visibility, maybe 800 meters northeast, the first visual confirmation. It was a civilian pattern helicopter, or something built to look like one. Dark gray, no markings visible at this distance, flying low and slow along the pass corridor, nose pitched slightly down. The search posture was unmistakable. It was threading the pass because the pass was where the relay team had been, and it wanted to understand why the relay hadn't transmitted. Ward watched it come. "What's the affiliation?" he said. "Private contractor or state adjacent," she said. "That airframe is built for mountain ops, not something a regional force fields independently. So the people who supplied the relay also have an air asset." "Yes." She paused. "Which means whoever funded this operation has significantly more resources than the ambush team suggested." The aircraft was 600 meters out. Ward could see it more clearly now. The rotor configuration, the camera pod under the nose, what appeared to be a weapon mount on the right side that might or might not be active. Hard to tell at distance in this light. "Can you see the weapon mount?" he said. "Yes." "Assessment?" "Mounted. I can't confirm whether it's hot from here. Assume it is." Ward looked at the aircraft, then at her, then back. "When you said you'd give it something to think about," he said, "what exactly does that mean?" "It means I'm going to make it stop looking for the relay team and start looking at us." She moved the rangefinder to her eye briefly, then set it down. 540 meters, coming at approximately 60 kilometers per hour. Wind is at my 10 o'clock, 9 knots. I repeat, what does making it look at us involve specifically? "The camera pod," she said. "It's looking down the pass. If I take the camera pod, it can't see, it can't transmit, and it has to decide whether to escalate or withdraw without knowing what it's dealing with." Ward processed this. A shot on a moving rotary aircraft at 500 meters in mountain wind conditions is difficult, she said. "Yes. I was going to say is not a normal human capability." She was quiet for a moment. "That's also true." The aircraft was 400 meters out. Ward's radio crackled. TOC, partial signal. Something about the aircraft advisory that the terrain was eating before it arrived. He acknowledged what he could and gave up on the rest. "If this goes wrong," he said, "if this goes wrong, we have a very large rock above us and a narrow profile," she said. "The weapon mount on that aircraft is forward-oriented. It's not designed for precision targeting in a confined corridor at this angle." "That's reassuring." "It's accurate," she said. "There's a difference." 350 meters. Ward stopped talking and pressed himself against the rock shelf and watched. She was breathing in the way he'd seen her breathe before the ridgeline shots. The slowed, deliberate rhythm that was less about calm and more about control. Not the absence of adrenaline. The management of it. She told him the camera pod. That was what she told him. The aircraft came down the pass at 60 kilometers per hour over ground, low, looking. Ward could see the camera pod rotating slightly, adjusting. It was live, it was looking, and in about 15 seconds, it was going to look at this debris field and find a woman and a Marine officer on a rock shelf, and whatever happened after that was going to happen very fast. She fired. The compressed sound of the suppressed rifle in the confined pass was still significant. A hard, businesslike crack that echoed once off the walls and disappeared into wind. Ward watched the aircraft. For 2 seconds, nothing. Then the camera pod went dark. Not explosively. It just stopped moving, stopped tracking, the lens assembly taking on the particular stillness of something that was no longer functioning as designed. The aircraft's behavior changed immediately. The nose came up, the pilot's instinctive reaction to an unknown threat from an unknown direction. The aircraft decelerated sharply, altitude climbing, and the weapon mount on the right side moved, sweeping, trying to acquire a target it couldn't locate because the camera it depended on for targeting was dead. "Down," the woman said, and they both went flat against the rock shelf as the aircraft's rotor wash hit the western wall and sent a cascade of loose snow off the upper debris field, and the weapon mount fired, 2 short bursts, automatic, chewing into the pass floor 70 meters below their position and 30 meters left of the debris field. Not aimed. Suppression. The pilot was blind and scared and putting fire into the space where the threat might be, which was every pilot's reasonable response to a threat they couldn't see. Ward kept his face against the rock and counted. The burst stopped. He heard the rotor pitch change. Not the acceleration of an attack run, but the different sound of a turn. The aircraft was repositioning. It had lost its camera, taken fire from an unknown position, and was now making the tactical decision that any reasonable pilot would make without targeting capability in a confined corridor against an unknown threat. Create distance, reassess, get out of the kill zone. Ward lifted his head. The aircraft was backing northeast, maintaining altitude, the weapon mount still active but no longer firing. At 200 meters, it turned, a sharp banking turn that put its nose back the way it had come. And the sound began to diminish. It didn't leave. Ward could still hear it, further out, higher up, hovering somewhere beyond the mouth of the pass, waiting. But it wasn't coming back in. Not yet. He looked at the woman. She was still behind the rifle, watching the northeast through her scope. Her breathing had returned to the managed rhythm. The secondary magazine was where she'd left it, untouched. "One shot," Ward said. She didn't respond. "You put 1 round through a camera pod on a moving aircraft at 320 meters when I fired," she said. Wind had shifted 2 knots to the east. The aircraft was decelerating. She paused. The pod was the largest stationary component. The camera housing doesn't move with the airframe vibration the way the mount does. Ward looked at her. "You've done this before," he said. "Not the ridgeline shots, not the ambush. This specifically, this category of impossible." She pulled back from the scope and looked at him. And what he saw in her face in that moment was not pride, not the performance of capability, not the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd proven something. It was something older and more complicated. The look of someone who has spent a significant portion of their life being very good at something that costs more than it returns, and has made their peace with the terms of that exchange without ever quite resolving them. "I've done variations of it," she said. Ward held her gaze. "Sticky 6. "That name," she said carefully, "belongs to an operational context that doesn't exist anymore. But the person it belongs to is on this rock shelf." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she began breaking down the bipod with the same practiced efficiency she used for everything, not avoiding the conversation exactly, but not continuing it either. "Your QRF," she said. Ward checked his watch. 5 minutes, roughly, if the revised ETA had been accurate. He keyed the radio. "TOC, Bravo 6 actual. Aircraft has withdrawn from pass, currently holding northeast of corridor. Distance unknown. We are moving to Valley Link-Up. Advise QRF of hostile air asset. Do not approach pass corridor until we have eyes on aircraft position. Acknowledge." This time the signal was cleaner. They'd moved enough within the pass that the terrain was no longer eating the transmission whole. TOC came back with acknowledgement, QRF position update, and a brief advisory about the aircraft that contained information Ward didn't have. The airframe had been tracked on a civilian radar station 12 kilometers northeast, registered to a logistics company that had exactly 3 aircraft in its inventory and exactly 0 plausible reason to be operating in this corridor on this day. A shell company. Someone's shell company. Ward relayed this to the woman as they descended the debris field. She absorbed it without visible reaction. Climbed down with careful attention to footholds, rifle slung, moving with the slightly more deliberate pace of someone managing accumulated physical cost. The first real sign Ward had seen that the morning was sitting on her the way it was sitting on everyone else. "You knew the company would be a cover," Ward said when they reached the pass floor. "I knew the equipment was supplied," she said. "I didn't know the mechanism." They started moving southwest. Ward kept his eyes on the northeast. The aircraft sound was still there, distant and hovering, the sound of something that hadn't decided yet. "What's it waiting for?" he said. Instructions, she said. It lost its camera. It lost its ground team. It can't confirm what happened. It's waiting for someone to tell it what to do next. And whoever that someone is deciding right now whether this operation is worth escalating. She kept moving. If they escalate, that aircraft comes back with a different posture. If they cut losses, it goes home, Ward said. Or it goes somewhere else, she said, and we don't know where. Ward thought about that. The pass curved right now. They were coming up on the final straightaway to the valley exit. 200 meters. Ward could see the light changing ahead, the gray sky opening up as the ridgeline spread apart, the wider space of the valley floor. Then his radio came alive. Not TOC. A different voice, different channel. Someone who'd switched to his patrol net, which meant someone who had his patrol's frequency, which meant either QRF or a very specific kind of problem. Bravo 6, this is Raptor 1, QRF element. 3 vehicles. We are at your beacon position. Be advised. We have visual on a rotary aircraft northeast of the pass, holding at approximately 4 kilometers, altitude 1500. It's not moving. Over. Ward keyed. Raptor 1, this is Bravo 6 actual. Do not approach the pass until I give the clear. We have 3 EPW with lead element approximately 150 meters southwest of my current position. I need medical assessment for 1 non-ambulatory. Scratch that. 1 minor injury. Right forearm. Over. Copy Bravo 6. We have a medevac standing by. What's your status? Ward looked at the northeast, listened to the distant percussion. Observer and I are coming out of the pass now, he said. Be ready to move fast once we're clear. Copy. Raptor 1, standing by. Ward lowered the radio. The woman was looking northeast again, standing in the pass with the open valley 40 meters ahead of them, looking at the curve of ridgeline where the aircraft was holding, reading something in the sound or the distance or the pattern of its hold that Ward wasn't getting. What? He said. It changed altitude, she said. 20 seconds ago. It came down 100 meters. Ward listened. He couldn't distinguish altitude from the sound at this distance. She apparently could. Coming back in? He said. Not yet. She was still listening. But it's thinking about it. We need to move. Yes. She turned from the northeast and looked at him. Captain, the people who ran this operation, the relay, the ambush team, the aircraft, they're going to know the relay failed and the ground team was captured. Within 48 hours, they're going to know exactly what unit was operating in this valley and who stopped them. Ward held very still. You're telling me my Marines are on someone's list now, he said. I'm telling you that this operation had a specific objective that wasn't accomplished today. People with resources don't abandon objectives. They adjust approaches. She looked at him steadily. Your unit is going to need a threat assessment. Your command needs to know what was in that pass and what the relay was intended to transmit to. You can provide that assessment. I can provide part of it, she paused. The part that I'm cleared to provide. And the rest? She looked at him with the same expression she'd worn all day. Level, direct, carrying something behind it that had weight and shape, but not a name she was going to give him right now. The rest, she said, is going to require a conversation between people who outrank both of us. Ward stood in the frozen pass with the valley ahead and the aircraft behind and 12 Marines waiting on the other side of a ridgeline, and he felt the full shape of the day pressing down on him. Not just the firefight, not just the relay, not just the impossible shot on a moving aircraft. The shape of what he didn't know. The shape of what she wasn't telling him, and the fact that whatever it was real enough and classified enough that she'd been sent here as an observer without a name, without a unit, without a single piece of paper that officially documented her presence. You weren't observing, were you, he said, when you were assigned to my patrol? She was quiet. You were looking for the relay. Still quiet. You knew there was a relay team in this corridor, and you needed a patrol to get you into position without flagging an official operation. He watched her face. That's why you have no paperwork. That's why nobody knows your unit. You came in on the back of a routine patrol because an official approach would have spooked whoever set this up. She looked at him. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. We should move, she said. Ward held for one more second. Then he turned and walked toward the valley, and she walked beside him, and the aircraft to the northeast held its altitude and its distance, and the sound of it was still there behind them when they cleared the pass and stepped into the open gray light of Black Ridge Valley. QRF was where they said they'd be. 3 vehicles, a dozen personnel, the particular organized controlled energy of a relief element that had been briefed and staged and was now doing what relief elements did. Ward saw his Marines immediately, Kowalski, head and shoulders above the nearest vehicle, already talking to the QRF lead, Reyes, looking considerably more tired than his 22 years should have allowed. Thibodeau sitting on a vehicle bumper with a fresh field dressing on his forearm, arguing with someone about whether he needed to get in the medical vehicle, which meant he was fine. The 3 prisoners were kneeling in the snow, secured, flanked by 2 QRF Marines who stood with the particular alertness of people who'd been told these individuals were worth paying attention to. Ward walked to the QRF lead, a first lieutenant named Garza, who had the good sense to look at Ward, assess his condition, and not ask how he was doing. "What do you need first?" Garza said. "Get that aircraft on every tracking asset you have," Ward said. "It's holding northeast of the pass at approximately 4 kilometers. I want to know where it goes when it leaves." "Already called it in," Garza said. "Aviation's on it." "The prisoners. These 3 need to go to the most secure facility your QRF is authorized to access. And I mean right now, not after processing. The equipment they were carrying..." He looked around. "Where's the relay?" "Here." Harper appeared at his shoulder, still holding the relay case, slightly snow-covered, looking like a man who'd carried something he didn't fully understand for 400 meters through a mountain pass and was ready to hand it to someone qualified to deal with it. Ward took it, looked at the woman. She was standing slightly apart from the organized activity, watching the northeast. Not the aircraft. The horizon beyond the pass, the ridgeline, the spaces between things. "Hey," Ward said. She turned. He held out the relay case. She looked at it, then at him. "I'm not the right person to..." she started. "You know what it is and you know where it needs to go," he said. "That makes you the right person." She took the case, held it with the same care she'd given her rifle. Something in the way she held it told Ward that this specific object in her hands, was closer to the actual reason she'd been in Black Ridge Valley today than anything else that had happened. "The aircraft is making a decision," she said quietly, still looking northeast. "I know. If it comes back into the pass, QRF needs to be out of the valley before it gets overhead." "I know." Ward turned to Garza. "Garza, listen to me very carefully." And then the aircraft sound changed. It was distant, still, but the pitch shifted. The change in rotor speed that meant a change in heading. The acoustic signature of a machine that had made its decision and was beginning to act on it. Ward turned northeast. Garza had heard it too. "Is that the..." "It's moving," the woman said. "Which direction?" She listened. The Marines around them listened, because something in the quality of the moment had reached everyone simultaneously, the way danger sometimes announces itself not in a single alarm, but in a collective held breath. "Northeast," she said. "It's going home." The sound diminished. Slowly, then faster, the Doppler shift of something moving away at altitude, the pass emptying of it, the valley going quieter in degrees. Ward exhaled. Around him, he heard the same exhale from 12 other people in varying forms. Kowalski's was a single word that Ward chose not to register officially. Reyes made a sound that was somewhere between laughter and something rawer, and Harper simply sat down in the snow. The woman set the relay case at her feet and looked at it. Ward walked to her, stood beside her. They both looked at the case. "That aircraft left because cutting losses was the instruction," he said. "Yes. Which means whoever gave the instruction has already calculated what we know and what we don't know and decided the risk of escalating is higher than the risk of walking away from today." "Yes. So they know they have time." "They always have time," she said. "People with resources always have time. They just used some of it today, and now they're going to rebuild and try something else." Ward looked at the relay case, then at the pass, then at his Marines, who were beginning the controlled, familiar work of consolidation, counting equipment, checking each other, accepting water from the QRF supply that someone had already broken out. The very human business of coming down from the mountain of the last 4 hours toward something that was not quite normal, but was at least not actively trying to kill them. "The conversation," Ward said, "the one between people who outrank both of us." She looked at him. How soon does it need to happen? She looked at the relay case. 48 hours, she said, before whoever ran this operation finishes their damage assessment and decides what they lost today is worth responding to. Ward nodded slowly, looked at the sky, flat, gray, the weather that had been building all morning now moving in earnest, the first fine snow beginning to fall across the valley in thin, wind-driven sheets. Your name, he said, your actual name. Not Sticky Six, not Observer, because I'm going to be writing a report about today, and I'm going to be writing about a woman who saved the lives of 9 Marines and stopped a relay transmission and put a round through a camera pod at 320 meters on a moving aircraft, and I cannot write unidentified attachment in a report that— You can, she said. You should. He looked at her. You will write, she said carefully, that an unidentified support specialist provided critical fire support during the contact phase and assisted in the recovery of unknown equipment from Frosthaven Pass. That's what the report says. And the rest of it? The rest of it, she said, goes into a file that you won't have access to, that I won't have access to, and that the people who outrank both of us will read in a room neither of us will be in. Ward held her gaze for a long moment. Kowalski appeared at his shoulder. Captain, Garza wants to move before the weather closes the road. 1 minute, Ward said. Kowalski looked at the woman, then back at Ward. Then, without a word, he went back to the vehicles. The snow was coming harder now, fine and dry and driven sideways by the wind, the kind of snow that didn't announce itself dramatically, but simply began to cover everything. The tracks in the valley floor, the scars of the firefight on the ridge line, the disturbed snow around the granite cluster where the patrol had rested that morning, already remote, already becoming something that was harder to see clearly. Reyes told you something out there, Ward said. Before we went into the pass, he said he believed you. She looked at him. He was right, Ward said, for what that's worth. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the relay case in her pack, and she looked at him with that same level expression, and there was something in it that was different from this morning. Not warmer, exactly, but less closed, like a door that was still locked but had been moved slightly in its frame. It's worth something, she said. She walked toward the vehicles. Ward stood in the falling snow and watched his Marines loading up, the QRF element running its withdrawal checks, Thibodeau finally losing the argument about the medical vehicle, and the woman moving through all of it with the same contained efficiency she'd moved through everything else today, present without being prominent, there without calling attention to the there-ness. The aircraft sound was completely gone now. The pass was silent. Ward shouldered his rifle and walked toward the vehicles, and the snow fell across Black Ridge Valley in thin, cold sheets, and whatever had happened in Frosthaven Pass today began the slow, quiet process of becoming a story that very few people would ever know and almost none would believe. The vehicles moved out of Black Ridge Valley at 13:47, and the snow came in behind them like a curtain being drawn. Ward rode in the lead vehicle, a hardened MR app that smelled like diesel and wet gear and the particular chemical undertone of stress sweat that no amount of cold air ever fully cleared. He had the front passenger seat. Garza drove. Behind them, 2 more vehicles carrying the patrol, the prisoners, and the relay case that sat in the second vehicle's rear compartment wrapped in a thermal blanket that one of the QRF Marines had produced without being asked, as if he understood instinctively that it needed to be treated carefully without understanding why. The woman was in the second vehicle. Ward knew this because he'd watched her get in, and because in the 40 minutes of road between Black Ridge Valley and the forward operating base at Keller Ridge, he found himself checking the side mirror more than the road ahead. Not for any specific reason he could name. The habit of keeping track of someone who had, in the space of one operational day, become a fixed point in his spatial awareness. The way good Marines became fixed points. The ones you always knew the location of without consciously tracking. Garza didn't talk much, which Ward appreciated. The radio ran in the background. Position updates, weather advisories, the aviation element that had been tracking the gray helicopter reporting that it had landed at a civilian airfield 60 kilometers northeast, registered to the same logistics company TOC had flagged earlier, and had not moved since, which meant it was done for today. Which meant the people who'd sent it had decided today was a loss and were not currently compounding that loss. That was the reasonable interpretation. Ward spent the drive not entirely believing the reasonable interpretation. Keller Ridge 4B was not a large installation. It had been built for a specific operational tempo that had since changed, and it had the look of a place that had been expanded in some directions and quietly abandoned in others. New prefab buildings sitting alongside older structures that were slowly losing their argument with the weather. The main gate was solid. The perimeter wire was maintained. Everything inside the wire had the organized functionality of a place that worked hard to be more than it appeared from the outside. The vehicles pulled through the gate at 14:29. Ward was out before the MRAP had fully stopped. He did a quick visual on his Marines as they dismounted, checking the way he always checked, the specific inventory of faces and posture, and the small tells that said someone was holding something together with insufficient materials. Thibodeau went directly to the medical bay with minimal resistance, which told Ward the arm was hurting more than Thibodeau had been letting on. Davies's hand was wrapped and functional. Reyes looked like he'd aged approximately 3 years in the last 8 hours, and was processing this with the dark humor of someone who'd decided not to examine it too closely yet. Kowalski came to Ward's shoulder within 90 seconds of dismount. "The debrief," Kowalski said. "How bad is it going to be?" "Honest assessment? Always." "We walked into an ambush that intelligence said wasn't there," Ward said. "We took one confirmed wound, prevented what appears to be a significant signals operation, recovered 3 prisoners and a piece of equipment that someone is very shortly going to tell me is above my classification level." He paused. "The debrief is going to involve a lot of people in the same room asking different versions of the same 2 questions. Which are? Why didn't you know, and why did you proceed anyway?" Kowalski absorbed this. "And the attachment." Ward looked across the compound. The woman had stepped out of the second vehicle and was standing near the rear compartment where the relay case was being offloaded, watching the 2 QRF Marines handle it with an attention that was calibrated to make them careful, without them understanding why they were being more careful than usual. "The attachment," Ward said, "is about to become someone else's problem, in ways that are probably going to create problems for me." "She saved our lives," Kowalski said. Flat, declarative. The tone of a man filing a record. "I know that. In case that gets lost somewhere between here and whatever room you're describing." "It won't," Ward said. "I'll make sure of it." Kowalski nodded once and went to see about his Marines. The debrief started at 600. It was held in what Keller Ridge called its tactical assessment room, which was a prefab building with better soundproofing than its exterior suggested, and a table that seated 8 comfortably and 12 with resentment. There were 10 people in the room when Ward arrived. He knew 4 of them. Colonel Marcus Hale sat at the head of the table, the battalion commander, a man who'd been in the Marine Corps for 28 years and had the particular quality of absolute stillness that very senior officers sometimes developed, the kind that didn't read as calm so much as compressed. He had a coffee that he wasn't drinking and a folder that he wasn't opening, and he watched Ward come through the door with an expression that conveyed precisely nothing. To Hale's right was Major Joanna Fenwick, the battalion S2 intelligence officer, Ward's age, considerably more expressive than Hale in the specific way of someone who processed information quickly and had trouble keeping the processing off her face. She had 3 folders in front of her and was writing in one of them as Ward sat down, and she did not look up. Lieutenant Garza was there, which Ward had expected. The first lieutenant who'd briefed the mission that morning, whose name Ward was only now registering as Castillo, was there also, sitting in a chair against the wall that was not at the table, which was its own kind of statement about where the institutional weight was going to fall. The other 6 were strangers. 2 of them wore civilian clothes under tactical jackets, the specific combination that meant government without uniform, the category of personnel that Ward had encountered enough times to recognize without being able to classify further. One was a woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone who had been a great many places and was entirely accustomed to being the most informed person in the room. The other was a younger man who was writing something Ward couldn't see and not looking at anyone. The remaining 4 were military, various branches, various ranks, none of them Marine Corps, all of them looking at Ward in the particular way of people who'd been briefed on him before he arrived. Ward sat down. The woman was not in the room. He noted this and filed it. "Captain Ward," Hale said, "thank you for getting here quickly." "Sir?" "Before we begin the formal debrief, I need to establish something for the record." Hale looked at him steadily. You were assigned a 12-man patrol with a specific and limited mission objective. Confirm. Yes, sir. Reconnaissance of Frosthaven Pass. Document evidence of recent activity. Return. You were also assigned an attachment. Hale paused. An observer. Yes, sir. Who provided you with no unit designation, no rank, no identifying information. Correct, sir. And you accepted this attachment without documentation. Ward held Hale's gaze. The attachment arrived with written authorization from your office, Colonel. A single-page memo, no letterhead, your signature, which I was told to treat as sufficient. A silence in the room, the kind that had texture. Hale looked at the woman in civilian clothes. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who had been expecting this exact exchange and had already decided how much of it to engage with. Captain Ward, she said, her voice was measured and unhurried. My name is not relevant to this debrief. My role is to help facilitate the information transfer that results from today's events. You can direct questions about the attachment to me. Ward looked at her. And you are? Authorized, she said, simply, without apology. Ward looked back at Hale. Continue, Hale said. Ward walked them through it. He used the format he'd been trained to use, chronological, factual, specific. And he kept his language precise because precise language in a debrief was the only reliable protection against having your words reshaped by the report that someone else was going to write about them. He described the warning at 0812, the wind patterns and the bird calls, his decision to slow the patrol, and the 6-meter window that had saved at minimum 4 lives. He described the ambush, the dispositions, the casualties, minimal, given the geometry. He described the engagement, the ridgeline shots, the decision to push into the pass. When he reached the relay, he stopped and looked at the civilian woman. The relay is in this building, he said. My understanding is that it's above my classification level. Is that accurate? Yes, she said. Then I'll describe what I observed functionally, and you can supplement from your own assessment. That's acceptable. He described it. The case, the setup, the signal acquisition sequence, the secondary power bus. He described the woman's knowledge of the equipment. He described the decision to stop it rather than document the transmission. Fenwick looked up from her folder when he reached that part. You stopped the transmission rather than allowing it to complete and tracking the signal. Yes. On whose recommendation? The observers. And you accepted that recommendation. She was right that we didn't have the equipment to track the signal from our position. I contacted TOC and the relay was already dark before TOC could establish a tracking asset. Fenwick wrote something. Ward watched her write it and could not read it. The aircraft engagement, said one of the military officers Ward didn't recognize, a full colonel, Army, who had the look of someone from an aviation or intelligence background. Walk me through that. Ward walked him through it. The sound, the visual confirmation, the decision to hold in the pass rather than withdraw completely. The shot. The room was quiet after that. 1 round, the Army colonel said, camera pod, moving aircraft, approximately 320 meters. Yes, sir. In mountain wind conditions. 11 knots, gusting east. Yes, sir. And the observer made this shot. Yes, sir. Another silence. This one had a different texture. The quality of people processing something they'd been told in a briefing before this meeting and are now having confirmed by a primary source. Captain Ward, the civilian woman said, the observer told you that the relay's secondary power bus configuration was consistent with equipment she'd seen before, in a context she couldn't discuss. Yes. Did she say anything else about that context? Ward thought about the alcove, about her hands on the casing, about the way she'd held the relay case after they cleared the pass. She said the equipment wasn't standard military issue for any regional force she knew of. She said someone supplied it specifically. He paused. She said the context in which she'd seen it before was one she couldn't discuss. Nothing further. She said the people who ran the operation would know within 48 hours exactly what unit was in Black Ridge Valley. She said my command needed a threat assessment and that the relay's intended transmission needed to be identified. Ward looked directly at the civilian woman. She also said that conversation needed to happen between people who outrank both of us. The civilian woman looked at him steadily, then she looked at Hale. Something passed between them that Ward caught the edges of, but not the center. Colonel Hale, she said, I think we've reached the point where the captain deserves the portion of this briefing that he's been waiting for. Hale looked at Ward. He picked up his coffee for the first time and held it without drinking it. The observer, Hale said, was not attached to your patrol as an observer. I know that, sir. She was running an independent operation with a specific objective in the Black Ridge Valley corridor. Your patrol was... He stopped. Chose a word. Facilitation. She was looking for the relay, Ward said. She was looking for evidence of a signals network that has been operating in this mountain corridor for approximately 4 months. Hale set the coffee down. Frosthaven Pass is a natural amplification corridor. A relay positioned there, at the right elevation, with the right equipment, can reach assets significantly further northeast than our current intelligence picture accounts for. How much further? Ward said. The civilian woman answered. Further than this conversation can document at your clearance level, Captain. What I can tell you is that the relay represents one node in a network. Today's operation was an attempt to bring that node online. It failed. Because she stopped it. Yes. Which means the network doesn't have the pass node, Ward said. But it still has the other nodes, correct. And the people running the network know we know about this node. They will, within... She glanced at her watch. They probably already do. Ward looked around the table, at the faces processing their own information, their own calculations. At Fenwick, who had stopped writing and was looking at her folder with the expression of someone reading a page they've read before and are now reading differently. At Castillo, against the wall, whose face had gone through several distinct phases during the debrief and had currently arrived at something that wasn't quite guilt, but occupied the same region. The intelligence assessment, Ward said. Castillo looked at him. The briefing this morning said the area was clear. Minimal contact 6 days prior. Ward kept his voice even and professional and directed the next part at Fenwick rather than Castillo, because Fenwick was S2 and the briefing was ultimately an S2 product regardless of who delivered it. Was that assessment based on incomplete information, or was the corridor deliberately characterized as low risk? Fenwick looked at him, then at Hale. The assessment was based on available reporting, she said carefully, which was incomplete. How incomplete? The signals indicators that would have flagged activity in the past were being monitored through a separate channel that wasn't feeding the patrol briefing process. She paused. That's a coordination failure that is being addressed. A coordination failure, Ward said. Yes. My patrol walked into a 12-person ambush because of a coordination failure. Captain. Hale's voice, level. Not warning, anchoring. Ward took a breath. Yes, sir. The question of how the intelligence picture was shaped and by whom is being examined at a level above this debrief, Hale said. What I need from you right now is a complete operational account, which you've provided, and your assessment of the attachment's conduct during the mission. Ward looked at Hale. My assessment, he said. Yes. He thought about it for exactly the amount of time it required, which was no time at all. She identified the ambush before it occurred, he said. She warned me with sufficient time to move the patrol partially out of the primary kill zone. Her engagement during the firefight was precise, professional, and directly resulted in the survival of the majority of my element. In the past, she identified the relay's nature and purpose faster than any organic capability my patrol had, and she stopped the transmission without collateral damage. Her engagement of the aircraft was, he stopped, found the right word, exceptional, in the technical sense. I've been in the Marine Corps for 12 years, and I've never seen a shot like that made outside of controlled conditions. The room was very quiet. She also, Ward said, told me at 0812 that something was wrong, that the valley felt wrong. I slowed the patrol based on her warning, and I believe that decision saved lives. He looked around the table at the faces. Whatever she is, he said, and whatever the circumstances of her attachment to my patrol, her conduct was exemplary. That's my assessment. Hale nodded slowly. The civilian woman was writing something on a small notepad that she'd kept angled away from the table throughout the debrief. She finished writing and looked up. Captain Ward, she said, thank you. I'd like to ask you to step out for a few minutes while we discuss one element of the operational picture that requires a more restricted discussion. Ward stood, picked up his coffee, which he also hadn't drunk, and moved to the door. He stopped. She should be in this room, he said, without turning around. Whatever you're about to discuss, She should be in the room for it. A pause. Captain, Hale started. She was in that valley. She ran the operation. She stopped the relay, and she stopped the aircraft, and she kept 9 of my Marines alive. Ward turned, looked at Hale directly. Whatever the institutional reason is for her not being at this table, it should be weighed against the fact that this conversation only exists because of what she did today, sir. Hale held his gaze. The civilian woman made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not agreement, something more complicated than either. She looked at Hale with an expression that was, for the first time in the debrief, something other than perfectly managed. She's already in the building, the woman said. She's been waiting. Ward looked at her. She didn't ask to be in this room, the woman said. She specifically said she wasn't needed in the debrief. She said that, Ward repeated. Yes. Ward thought about that. About the level assessing look. About the rest of it goes into a file that neither of us will see. About the precise, undemonstrative way she'd handed over the relay case and walked away from something she'd apparently spent months working toward without any visible need to be in the room when it was discussed. That sounds like her, he said. He went out. The hallway outside the assessment room was narrow and cold. The heating in this part of the building was fighting a losing battle with the gap under the exterior door at the far end. Ward stood against the wall and drank his cold coffee and looked at the gap under the door where the wind was getting in. She was in the building. He found her 20 minutes later in a room 3 doors down, a small space that appeared to be used primarily for equipment staging, currently occupied by a folding table, 2 chairs, and the relay case sitting in the corner wrapped in its thermal blanket. She was at the table with a mug of something that was either tea or coffee and a map she wasn't looking at. She looked up when Ward came in. "How long have you been waiting?" he said. "About an hour?" "They didn't offer you the debrief." "I declined the debrief." She looked at him steadily. "I wrote my operational report before we left the valley. It's been transmitted." "To who?" "To the people it needed to reach." Ward sat down across from her, set his coffee down, looked at her. "You're not going to get credit for today," he said. "No. The operation, the relay, the shots, none of it goes anywhere that has your name on it." "That's accurate." "Does that bother you?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the loaded quiet of someone deciding how honest to be, more the thoughtful quiet of someone who has asked themselves this question before and knows the answer isn't simple. "It used to," she said. "Earlier in my career, when I thought recognition was—" She paused. "When I thought it mattered in the way I thought it did." "And now?" She looked at the relay case in the corner. "Now I know what that case represents. I know what the network it was part of represents. I know that stopping it today gives the people who are working the larger problem an additional window to work in." She looked back at him. "That's what matters. Whether my name is on the report it's not the same category of thing." Ward looked at her. "When did you know?" he said. "About the relay. About this specific corridor. How long have you been working toward today?" She considered the question with the same precision she applied to everything. 7 months to develop the intelligence picture. Another 6 weeks to establish the operational parameters. The assignment to your patrol was the last piece. Once we confirmed the timeline for the relay activation, I needed a route into the corridor that didn't announce itself. "You used my patrol?" he said. "Yes. And if the ambush hadn't happened, I would have found the relay team and dealt with it independently." She paused. "The ambush complicated things. The ambush nearly killed my people." "Yes." No hesitation, no softening. "It did." Ward held this for a moment. He wasn't angry. He'd moved through that territory somewhere in the vehicle back to Keller Ridge and had arrived at the more complex landscape on the other side of it. But he wanted her to know he'd noticed, that he'd counted. "Thibodeau's arm is going to need surgery," he said. "Davies has tendon damage in his left hand. Reyes lost his kit and got around close enough to the body that he's going to be hearing that sound in his sleep for the next year." She looked at him. She didn't look away. "I know," she said. "They were collateral to your operation." "Yes." "And you're okay with that?" "I'm not okay with it," she said, and her voice carried something that he hadn't heard in it before. Not distress, not guilt, in the simple sense, but the specific weight of someone who has made decisions in the field that cost other people and has learned to carry the weight without being buried by it, and has not confused that capacity with the absence of the weight. I'm not okay with it. I'm functional despite it. That's different. Ward looked at her for a long time. Outside the room, he could hear the building, voices from the debrief room, the controlled activity of the base processing the day, a vehicle somewhere out in the compound running its engine. Normal sounds. The sounds of a place that had absorbed an abnormal day and was converting it back into operational routine. The network, Ward said. The relay was one node. How many nodes? She looked at him. That's above your clearance, she said. Estimate. Captain, not for the report, he said. For me. Because I walked 9 of my people into that valley today without knowing what it was, and I'd like to understand the shape of what we were standing in the middle of. She was quiet. Significant, she said finally. The network is significant. What was in the past today was one piece of an infrastructure that has been building for considerably longer than 7 months. My operation was targeted. One node, one timeline, one window. She paused. There are other people working the other pieces. Some of them are better positioned than I am. Some of them are considerably worse positioned. And if the network completes, Ward stopped. What does it connect? What's it for? She looked at him with those level brown eyes, and in them he saw the thing he'd been seeing all day without fully naming. The exact knowledge of where the line was, and the exact discipline to stand at the line without crossing it, even when the person asking the question had earned the right to ask. More than I'm going to tell you, she said, but enough that stopping it matters. Ward exhaled. Yeah, he said. Okay. He picked up his cold coffee, drank it, made a face. She looked at his expression and something shifted slightly in hers, the almost not a smile that he'd seen once before in the valley. There's a machine in the corridor, she said. It was making something approximating coffee when I came through. Approximating. It was hot, she said. That's the most I can say for it. Ward almost laughed. Not quite. The day was sitting too heavily for quite, but the almost was real. He stood, looked at the relay case. They're going to take that in the next hour, he said. People from that room are going to walk in here and pick it up, and it's going to disappear into a chain of custody that neither of us will ever be able to follow. Yes. And whatever was on it, whatever it would have transmitted, they're going to work that angle without you. That's how it's supposed to work, she said. I found it. I stopped it. Someone else takes it from here. She looked at the case. That's the job. Is it? Ward looked at her. Or is it the job you've accepted because the alternative is not doing the job at all? She looked up at him. The question had landed somewhere. He could see it in the slight shift of her posture, the fractional change in the quality of her stillness. She didn't answer. Ward nodded. He walked to the door. Ward, she said. He turned. She was looking at the relay case, not at him. The threat assessment I mentioned, for your unit. She paused. I've already flagged it. The appropriate people will be in contact with Colonel Hale within 24 hours. Your Marines will be protected. Ward looked at her, at the profile of her face, the focused, controlled expression, the eyes on the case in the corner. Thank you, he said. She said nothing. He went out into the corridor and found the machine making something approximating coffee and stood in front of it for a moment before putting in the coins, because he was thinking about a woman who'd spent 7 months working toward a single case in the corner of a cold equipment room and had already started thinking about what came next before the case was even out the door. The machine produced something hot. Ward drank it in the corridor and looked at the gap under the exterior door where the wind was getting in, and the snow was still coming down outside. And somewhere above Frosthaven Pass, the gray sky was closing the corridor under 3 inches of new snowfall, covering the tracks, covering the scars, covering the evidence of everything that had happened there today under a clean, undifferentiated white. The debrief room door opened. The civilian woman came out first, saw Ward in the corridor, and stopped. Captain, she said, we're ready to continue. Ward looked down the corridor toward the equipment room. One question, he said. She waited. Her clearance level, he said. The context she couldn't discuss. How long has she been doing this? The civilian woman looked at him with the expression of someone deciding which version of the truth was both accurate and appropriate. Long enough, she said, that the people in that room know her by a name that isn't Sticky Six, And that name carries enough weight that nobody in that debrief questioned a single decision she made in that valley today. Ward absorbed this. And Sticky Six, he said, where did that come from? The civilian woman looked at him steadily. An operation. 4 years ago. A mountain corridor not entirely unlike this one. The shot that ended the operation was... She paused, and it was the first pause he'd heard from her that seemed to cost something. It was the kind of shot that gets a name attached to it, and the name stuck. Ward looked at her. What was the shot? He said. She held for 2 seconds. 1,400 meters, she said. Moving target. Partial exposure window of approximately 2 seconds. She paused again. Crosswind at 18 knots. The target was wearing body armor rated to stop a standard precision round at that distance. The corridor was very quiet. She put it through the gap in the collar, the woman said. 2 seconds, 1,400 meters. She looked at Ward without expression. That's where the name came from. Ward stood in the corridor with his approximation of coffee and the wind coming under the door and the sound of the base processing its day, and he thought about a woman in a frozen equipment room looking at a relay case and thinking about what came next. She should be in that debrief room, he said. She knows that, the civilian woman said. She chose not to be. Why? The civilian woman considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. Because, she said finally, she decided a long time ago that the room isn't where the work happens. The room is where people talk about what already happened. She turned toward the debrief room door. Captain, we're ready. Ward looked once more down the corridor toward the equipment room. Then he followed her in. The second half of the debrief lasted 40 minutes and accomplished what debriefs usually accomplished. It produced a shared version of events that everyone in the room could sign their name to, which was not the same thing as the truth, but was the closest institutional approximation of it that the system knew how to generate. Ward answered what he was asked. He kept his language precise. He did not volunteer the things he'd learned in the corridor, because the corridor was not the debrief room. And the woman in the equipment room 3 doors down had been very clear about which category of information belonged where. When it was over, Hale kept him back. The others filed out, the civilian woman last, carrying her small notepad and the relay case, which 2 people Ward had never seen before had come to collect with the specific wordless efficiency of people performing a task they'd performed before. The case went with them. Ward watched it go and felt the strange absence of something he hadn't been holding in the first place. The door closed. Hale looked at him. Your report, Hale said. I need it by 0800 tomorrow. Yes, sir. The attachment. In your report, she is an unidentified support specialist. That's the language. I understand, sir. Hale was quiet for a moment. He picked up the coffee he still hadn't drunk and finally drank some of it, with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for a moment that was functional rather than ceremonial. He set it back down. Ward, he said, off the record. Ward waited. I've been in this corps 28 years, Hale said. I've had 2 encounters with personnel from the program she operates under. 2. He paused. They don't get assigned to routine patrols. I know that, sir. Which means Black Ridge Valley was not a routine patrol, regardless of what the orders said. No, sir. Which means someone at a level significantly above mine made a calculation about what my battalion's patrol schedule could support and acted on that calculation without fully informing me. Hale's voice was even. Not angry, the controlled, banked version of anger that senior officers sometimes achieved when they'd had sufficient time between the event and the conversation. I have feelings about that. I understand, sir. I imagine you do. Hale looked at him steadily. She asked me when she arrived at this installation 8 days ago whether your patrol could be trusted to handle an unplanned contact without compromising the operation. Ward went still. She came here 8 days ago, he said. Yes. And she asked about my patrol specifically. She asked about you specifically, Hale said. By name. She had a file. Ward absorbed this. What did you tell her? He said. Hale almost smiled. It was a very small almost. I told her that you were the most frustratingly capable captain in my battalion, and that if anything went wrong in that valley, you would handle it without needing to be told how. He paused. I also told her that you would ask questions she wasn't going to want to answer, and that she should plan accordingly. Ward looked at his commanding officer. She said she'd manage, Hale said. Well, He found her in the equipment room at 1847. The relay case was gone. The thermal blanket it had been wrapped in was folded on the table, which struck Ward as the kind of detail that said something specific about a person. The instinct to fold the blanket even when no one was watching, even when the thing it had protected was already gone. She was packing her kit. Methodical, the same way she did everything. Each item in its place, nothing wasted. The hard-shell rifle case was on the table, the weapon already broken down and stowed, the bipod folded, the scope covered. She looked up when Ward came in. "It's done?" she said. "Debrief's closed. Report due at 0800. She nodded and continued packing. Ward sat in the chair across from where she was working. He didn't say anything immediately. He watched her pack with the attention of someone who has decided to stay in a room and is not going to be argued out of it. "Hale told me," he said after a moment. She looked up. 8 days ago," he said. "You came here 8 days ago." She held his gaze without expression. "You had a file on me," he said. "I had files on every patrol operating in the Black Ridge corridor," she said. "Yours was the most viable option for the timeline." "Because?" "Because you had the right combination of operational competence and independent judgment," she said. "A captain who follows orders precisely doesn't work for what I needed. I needed someone who could read a situation and make a call without waiting for authorization that wasn't going to come." Ward looked at her. "That's a very diplomatic way to say you needed someone who would bend the rules at the right moment. It's an accurate way to say I needed someone capable of sound judgment under conditions the orders didn't account for." "Same thing." "Not quite," she said. And the way she said it was not combative. It was the precise, patient correction of someone who cared about the distinction. Ward looked at the folded thermal blanket on the table. "Where do you go from here?" he said. She closed a buckle on her pack. "That's not information I can—" "Not the operational details," he said. "Generally, after today. After this installation in this valley and this particular version of it, where do you go?" She looked at him. The question had a different weight than the operational ones, and she was feeling that weight. He could see it in the slight change in her posture. Not discomfort, more the adjustment of someone picking up something heavier than the previous item. "Wherever the next one is," she said. "Another valley. Usually. Another patrol that doesn't know what they're walking into. Usually a smaller footprint than today. Today was—" She paused, and it was the pause of someone choosing honest over manageable. Today was more complicated than it should have been. The ambush team was larger than our intelligence suggested. The timeline was compressed. "Things went wrong," Ward said. "Yes." "People got hurt." "Yes." "And you're going to go find the next one, and it's going to happen again." She looked at him with those level eyes, and in them he saw the thing clearly for the first time. The thing he'd been seeing all day in fragments and partial angles. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't the absence of feeling. It was the specific quality of someone who had looked directly at what the work cost and had decided, with full information, to keep doing it anyway. Not because they had to, because they understood exactly what stopped happening if they stopped. "Yes," she said. "That's probably accurate." Ward was quiet for a moment. "Hale said you asked if my patrol could be trusted." He looked at her. "You could have told me, before the valley, what you were looking for, what the risk was. You could have given me the actual picture." "If I told you, you would have reported it up the chain," she said. "Your command would have escalated. An escalated response to a target that was actively monitoring the corridor for official military movement would have—" "Spooked them," Ward said. "I know. You explained the operational logic." He paused. "I'm not asking about the operational logic." She stopped packing. She looked at him. "You're asking why I didn't trust you," she said. "Yes." The room was quiet. Outside, the bass sounds continued. Engines, voices, the particular hum of a working installation in a cold climate. In here, it was just the two of them, and the folded blanket and the packed equipment, and a question that had more weight than its words. "I've worked with people I trusted," she said slowly. "Fully. People I read correctly and trusted, and—" She stopped. Started again. "The operational security wasn't about you specifically. It was about the pattern. Every time I've expanded the circle of people who knew what I was doing, the circle has cost something. People, time, targets." She paused. "I stopped expanding the circle." "That's a lonely way to work," Ward said. She held his gaze. Yes. Is it sustainable? The question landed in a way he hadn't entirely intended, or maybe he had intended it, and the slight widening of her eyes was confirmation that it had reached somewhere real. I don't think about sustainable, she said. I think about effective. That's not an answer. No, she said. It's not. Ward looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. Plain military issue with his name and contact information and nothing else. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it. That's not going to work, she said. My contact channels don't. It's not for contact channels, he said. It's for if you're ever in a position where you need someone who's already seen the thing you can't explain to anyone else. He paused. Someone who knows what sticky six means when the name comes up in a room. She looked at the card, at the table, at the folded blanket. Then she picked up the card and put it in her jacket pocket without a word. Ward moved to the door. Ward, she said. He turned. She was looking at him with something in her expression that was neither the managed professional composure of the debrief nor the field-focused attention of the valley. It was something more unguarded than either. Not raw, but honest in the specific way of someone who doesn't practice that particular expression and is making an effort. I read your file, she said, 8 days ago, when I was deciding on the patrol. She paused. Fallujah, 2019. The bridge. Ward went still. The bridge was not in his official record. The bridge was in a report that had been classified for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting operational security and everything to do with protecting the institutional reputation of people who hadn't been on it. You have access to that report, he said. Yes. Then you know what happened. I know what the report says happened, she said, and I know what 3 separate witness accounts say happened, which is different. She looked at him. What you did on that bridge saved 11 people and cost you a promotion board and 2 years of assignments that were beneath your capability, and nobody ever acknowledged that publicly. Ward said nothing. I wanted you to know, she said, that the people who read those files, the full files, not the official record, those people know the difference between what the record says and what actually happened. She paused. You were right. On the bridge. And the people who mattered knew it. The room was very quiet. Ward looked at the floor for a moment, then at her. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because you spent most of today in a valley not knowing what you were standing in the middle of, and you made sound decisions anyway, and your people are alive because of it. She held his gaze. And because you're going to write a report tomorrow that puts unidentified support specialist where a name should go, and you're going to do it without complaint. And I wanted you to know that that particular kind of discipline, carrying something correctly even when it costs you, doesn't go unnoticed by everyone. Ward stood in the doorway. He had a number of responses available to him, and none of them were right, so he did what she had done all day when words weren't the correct tool. He held the silence and let it mean what it meant. Then he nodded once, and he walked out. He wrote the report at 06:30 the following morning, in the small office that Keller Ridge had assigned him during the stay. 3 hours of sleep, bad coffee, the particular clarity that came from exhaustion, burning away everything non-essential. Unidentified support specialists provided critical fire support during the contact phase and assisted in the recovery of unknown equipment from Frosthaven Pass. 1 sentence. Accurate. Insufficient. The best available option. He filed it at 0749. At 0820, Kowalski knocked on the office door and came in without waiting, which was something Kowalski had been doing for 2 years and Ward had never successfully discouraged. She's gone, Kowalski said. Ward looked up. The attachment. Checked out at 0600. Vehicle to the airfield. Kowalski leaned against the doorframe with the posture of a man delivering information he has feelings about, but has decided not to articulate fully. No one saw her go, just gone. Ward looked at his filed report on the screen. Okay, he said. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Thibodeau's surgery is scheduled for Thursday. Davies is looking at 6 weeks on the hand. Reyes got issued replacement kit and is somehow annoyed that the new pack is better than the one that got shot. That sounds right. The 3 prisoners are being transferred today. No one's telling us where. Also sounds right. Kowalski looked at him. You okay? Ward thought about the question with the genuine consideration it deserved. "Ask me in a week," he said. Kowalski nodded and left. Ward sat in the office and looked at the report, and then at the window, where the snow was still coming down over Keller Ridge in the thin, persistent way it had been coming down since yesterday afternoon. Not dramatically, not in the heavy sheets that closed mountain passes, but steadily, the kind of snowfall that accumulated without announcing itself. He thought about what she'd said, wherever the next one is. He thought about 1,400 meters and a 2-second window and a crosswind at 18 knots and the name that had come from it, spoken in rooms he'd never be in. He thought about a woman who folded the thermal blanket even when no one was watching. 3 weeks later, Ward received an unmarked envelope through the battalion mail system, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of plain paper with 4 lines of text, no signature. Network node, 2 confirmed inactive, node 3 under assessment, operational window extended, bridge report reclassified, full record corrected. S6 Ward read it twice, folded it, put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, where it stayed for the rest of the deployment. He never told anyone about it. Not Kowalski. Not Hale. Not the board that finally, 6 months later, with what the convening officer described as a correction to the historical record, promoted him to major and restored the 2 missing years to his official progression without further explanation. What Ward understood, in the way you understand things that don't come with documentation, was that someone had pulled a file that had been sitting in a classified archive for 5 years and had made a single call to a single person who had enough authority to make the correction happen. Not publicly, not with acknowledgement, just corrected. The record made accurate. The bridge restored to what it had actually been. The way things got done when the person doing them had decided that the room wasn't where the work happened. Thibodeau's surgery went well. Davies recovered full function in his hand by February, which his surgeon described as better than expected, and Davies described as obviously. Reyes extended his contract, citing, when pressed, a general preference for situations where things happened, which Ward took as the closest thing to a compliment the Valley was going to produce. Kowalski made Master Sergeant in March. He told Ward about it in the same flat, declarative tone he used for everything, and Ward told him it was about time, and Kowalski said something unprintable and went back to work. The gray helicopter was tracked to a maintenance facility in a country Ward wasn't cleared to name, where it was deregistered and its parts distributed to 3 separate resale channels within 6 weeks of Black Ridge Valley. The logistics company that had owned it dissolved shortly after, its registered officers untraceable, its financial records a careful maze of entities that investigators from 2 separate agencies spent 4 months walking into dead ends. The 3 prisoners were processed through a system that Ward had no visibility into and produced, over the following months, a quantity of intelligence that Ward was never briefed on and could only infer from the pattern of certain subsequent operations in certain subsequent corridors that bore specific resemblances to the Black Ridge geometry. The relay sat in a facility Ward didn't know the location of, examined by people. Ward didn't know the names of, contributing to a picture that Ward would never see in full. This was the nature of the work. You did the piece you could do, and you trusted that the other pieces were being done by people who understood their portion, and you didn't require the complete picture to know that your portion had mattered. Ward understood this better after Black Ridge than he had before it. 8 months after Frosthaven Pass, Ward was in a different country, at a different forward installation, running a different kind of operation, when the name came up. He was in a joint briefing, multi-agency, multinational, the kind of meeting where the coffee was better than the information sharing, but both were present. A signals analyst from a partner service was walking through a network topology that Ward recognized in its general shape, and in the middle of the presentation the analyst mentioned, in passing, a disruption to a relay node that had occurred 8 months prior in a northern mountain corridor. That disruption, the analyst said, is what gave us the 6-month window we needed to map nodes 2 and 3. Without it, we'd still be working blind. Someone across the table said, "Who ran that disruption?" The analyst looked at his notes. Unidentified support specialist. A brief silence. Ward looked at his coffee. The man beside him, a British officer named Caldwell, who Ward had worked with twice before and found consistently useful, leaned close and spoke quietly. "You know something about that?" Ward looked at the presentation, at the network topology on the screen. at the nodes that had been mapped because of a 6-month window that had come from a single-stop transmission in a frozen pass. "I was in the valley," Ward said. That was all. Caldwell looked at him, read something in his face that he apparently decided not to press on. "Unidentified support specialist," Caldwell said quietly. "Cheerful way to describe whoever put a round through a camera pod at 300 meters on a moving aircraft. I've heard that story." "From who?" "Aviation people. It circulates." Caldwell paused. "They don't have a name attached to it." "No," Ward said. "They don't." He thought about a card in a jacket pocket, about a folded thermal blanket, about a woman walking through QRF activity without drawing attention to herself, present without being prominent, there without calling attention to the there-ness. He thought about what the civilian woman had said. She decided a long time ago that the room isn't where the work happens. The briefing continued. The network topology filled the screen. The work that had started in Black Ridge Valley was still being worked, by people in rooms and by people outside rooms, and by one particular person who was somewhere Ward didn't know, doing the portion that came next, in a valley that hadn't been named yet. Ward wrote no memoir. He gave no interviews. When years later, the broad outlines of the Black Ridge Valley operation appeared in a declassified summary buried in an agency report that almost no one read, his name appeared in a footnote as patrol commander with no further detail. The unidentified support specialist did not appear at all. This was how it was supposed to work. Ward had made his peace with this fact, imperfectly and gradually, the way you make peace with things that are true but not fair, by understanding that fair and necessary were not always the same category, and that the value of a thing was not determined by whether anyone ever attached a name to it. Thibodeau, years later, told the story of Black Ridge Valley at a retirement dinner in the way veterans tell stories, compressed and vivid, and already becoming something slightly larger than it had been. He described the ambush, the firefight, the woman with the rifle. He said she'd saved their lives. He said she'd made shots that weren't possible. He said she'd walked away without telling them her name. He described, without using the words, what it looked like to be very good at something in a way that didn't require an audience. The people around the table listened. Some of them didn't quite believe it. That was fine. The ones who mattered did. And somewhere, in another corridor on another mountain, in the particular focused silence of someone who has made their calculation and is waiting for the wind to settle to a manageable number, the work continued. It always did. Some people protect others from dangers those others will never know existed. They carry the weight of that invisibility not because no one sees them, but because they've decided that being seen was never the point. The work was the point. It always had been.